family.
No.
Yeah, we had Maria Emmerich and her husband and their children out here, and she's written a bunch of keto books and stuff like that. Really good people, great information. One of their books actually, it breaks down um, like all the nutrition that's in, steak and all the nutrition that's in like eggs, and it was really cool because a lot of times when it comes to like steak, I mean, people just know it has like fat and protein.
Right.
They might know that it has iron. So then
Yep.
their knowledge starts to kind of wear down after that. But in this one, it was really cool because it listed everything. It showed that it has, just things I didn't know before. I didn't really realize that steak had potassium in it. I didn't know that.
Yeah. Have you studied carnosine at all?
No.
Carnosine is exceptionally interesting. So obviously plants don't make it.
Right.
Carno,
Right.
meat, and it binds to sugar.
It's an amino acid, right?
It's made from 2 different amino acids. Yeah. So animals make it, but steak is loaded with it, obviously. But what it does is it protects against advanced glycation end products, which is basically. Have you heard of AGEs, advanced glycation end products?
No.
Oh,
Most of the stuff we talk about today, I probably never heard any of it.
Yeah.
I'm not as well versed as Rob Wolf. I saw you on his podcast.
Yeah, well, so advanced glycation end products, when you have sugar in your body for too long, it starts sticking to things.
Ah.
So you get these chunks of sugar sticking to your proteins.
It doesn't sound healthy.
No, in fact, it cross-links it sticks 2 proteins together. It's called cross. So in the morgue when they fix a body, they use formalin, right? Formaldehyde.
Wow, yeah.
And that preserves it because what that does is it cross-links proteins. That's exactly what formaldehyde does, and that's what advanced glycation does. That's one of the problems with sugar.
Wow.
If you have too much sugar all the time in your body, you get AGEs, advanced glycation, which is a perfect acronym, right?
Yeah.
And carnosine protects against that. So in other words, you can have a little bit higher blood sugar if you're eating meat because you're getting protection with the carnosine.
That's actually crazy interesting. I've never.
That's why I think that's one of the secrets of the carnivore diet that most people aren't even talking about.
Right.
Is you get a lot of carnosine.
Well, I think the carnivore diet is great. I think that there's a lot of interesting things that happen, and I think that whenever you just start taking out junk out of your diet, that's when you're going to start to see a lot of magic. And so I think that sometimes people forget that. And there's a lot of people that will say, if there is a superfood out there, it very well could be red meat, or it could be liver or heart, or some of these things that are nutrient dense, right?
Yeah.
It makes a lot of sense. Steak has a lot of fat and protein in it and stuff, and a lot of other nutrients that we need. But I think it's the absence of junk. When you commit 100%. To a keto diet, a Whole30 diet, a paleo diet, you start to commit to like cutting things out. And maybe for the last 20 years, you've been having cereal every morning.
Yeah.
Maybe you don't know that you don't do well with grains.
Yeah.
Maybe you never realized you don't do well with milk.
It took me a long time to figure it out. Yeah.
It takes a long time to figure these things out, and it takes an even longer time to really put them into practice to the point where you're like, you know what, I'm not doing that anymore because I don't like the result. It doesn't feel good. What I'm doing this way feels so much better that I'm not going back the other way. Now, you just mentioned that you kind of have a reaction to choline.
Yeah.
And so maybe too many eggs or something might give you a headache, or certain products and stuff like that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I think when I was doing my PhD initially, are we live, by the way, right now?
Yep.
We're
rock on.
Yeah, we're going.
I always do this where I just talk too much and then
no,
realize.
If you could just pull the microphone up a little bit closer to you.
Yeah, I felt like it fell in on me.
Yeah, it did. It got a little lazy on you.
Yeah, that's cool. But no, I think when I was doing my PhD, right, when I was starting, I didn't believe in this idea that gluten was a problem. You're kind of taught that a macro is a macro, a carb is a carb, whatever, that sort of thing.
Calories in, calories out.
Yeah.
That's what we're taught.
But then I had a daughter who was clearly dairy sensitive and gluten sensitive. And it took me like a year. Embarrassingly, it took me about a year to figure that out. And then that was a huge awakening, a huge epiphany for me, because then I started tinkering with that stuff on my own.
Yeah.
And I realized, okay, my wife's got the dairy sensitivity. I can do dairy all day long, but gluten for sure gets my system all messed up. Makes me really tired, for example.
Well, great.
Yeah, then choline, like you said.
Right.
Yeah.
a great way to set an example for your kids is to, just basically start to kind of eat. You have a certain eating regimen, and then they adopt hopefully a similar one. And so, for yourself, with your daughter having these problems and your wife having these problems, did you just for yourself get rid of some of those things as well?
Oh yeah, we're pretty much no grains and pretty much whole foods. I mean, I shot a deer last week. I was just talking to the guys here.
Yeah, you love to hunt, huh?
Oh yeah,
Cool.
yeah. I shot 4 last year and with my bow, and then I thought that'd be enough meat for the year to have 2 chest freezers, and it was done by the spring. Didn't even get me through the summer.
Yeah, cranking through it pretty good.
So this year I think I need 5 deer, but
Yeah.
yeah, I try and just do whole foods and get back to the basics. Not
Pretty
too much
damn
processed.
cold in Minnesota. Is it tough to hunt
Amazing.
out there?
Yeah, but that's one of the things I like.
Yeah, it's fun, huh?
Yeah, well, the deer get a lot more desperate with the food supply, and
Right.
if you can find a good food source,
Right.
yeah, they come right into it.
So, speaking of food sources, what has kind of happened to our food source? I mean,
Yeah.
you hear these people kind of make these analogies, and they'll say the pussification of our society, and how men aren't as manly anymore. And we're not like digging ditches and carrying buckets of water and going out and jumping on a wild boar's back and breaking its neck and things things like that, right?
Well, you are, but
Yeah,
most
yeah.
people aren't.
Well, I do it just for the practice, just for fun. But we're not as like we're not kind of forced to do these things. Maybe not forced to use tools, and so therefore, maybe we're not. Maybe the women aren't as womanly as they normally would be under normal circumstances. You can take that at whatever way you want, and maybe the men aren't as quote unquote manly as they used to be, and maybe some of the stuff has to do with our food and our water.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's a really hot button topic right now because of all the gender identity
right.
stuff and politics. But from a chemistry perspective, I mean, there's no denying. Obviously, there's differences between men and women in terms
Right.
of hormones and chemicals in your body. And yeah, I mean, in science, they oftentimes call it male feminization. And I mean, a lot of scientists try and skirt around that. They say,
Quote unquote.
yeah, they try and avoid that term. But if they're being honest, I think, a lot of times you see that, and that's for men, right? And just an example of that would be lower testosterone, right? Which we see, since 1990, the average man was about 500. Then in the 2000s, it was about 400. And now it's about 300 is the average testosterone in men.
Shit.
And the lab companies have even dropped their what they consider normal. Their normal range has dropped. So in other words, if you come in with 250, in 1990, they'd say, oh, you're low, right? And today they say, well, you're good. You're normal because that's normal. And that's an example of male feminization. But you also see problems in women too, because puberty is getting a lot younger and younger. For example, doctors are seeing a lot of 8-year-olds with puberty, girls. And you see it in boys too, actually, but more so in women. And they're doing the exact same thing there. And I wrote about this in my book because they're trying to redefine the normal age range of puberty now because it's become so common.
Wow.
And I think that's because of these artificial chemicals that we're exposed to in our food, in our water, in our personal care products, which is a huge source that most people are overlooking.
Just the general basis of it is that maybe the automobiles that we have, and maybe some of the ways that we care for our crops, and maybe just I don't know, the toxification of the earth from us living here. Maybe all these things have contaminated our foods with things that could potentially raise our estrogen levels, and your estrogen and your testosterone levels. I would imagine there's some give and take on that. Like your estrogen is being elevated by something, maybe your testosterone might drop, and maybe vice versa.
Yep. And it's especially through the protein called SHBG, which I know you know a lot about. But basically, in my book, I call that the limo service for hormones to try and make it simple for people to understand, because testosterone and estrogen, they both float on water.
Right.
It's like cholesterol. They're made from cholesterol, both of them. And that's one of the definitions of a sex hormone. It's a hormone made from cholesterol as opposed to,
So it's like, would it be, is it fat soluble?
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah. And that's one of the issues with the artificial estrogens. They store in your fat. But basically, just to get around your bloodstream, your blood is aqueous. It's like water. So they can't just get around your blood. So they need to get in the limo, right? They need to get on SHBG, and both estrogen and testosterone both ride that same limo. They both ride SHBG to get around your blood. So they're competitive with each other. And that's one of the ways your body kind of detects and regulates that relationship. And it's a delicate balance.
Right.
And the other aspect of estrogen, natural estrogen, and testosterone, frankly, is they're at the nanogram levels in our body. Nanogram. And that's 10 to the minus ninth grams.
They're small,
that's,
right?
yeah, that's a difficult thing to measure. And so, when I'm talking about men's estrogen, usually I'm talking about 20 nanograms per liter. That's the natural level.
Right.
Usually women, interestingly enough, they're also about 20 up to 400. They range depending on the time of the month. So most people would think, women are in the thousands, right? They think women are so much more estrogen, and that's true if a woman is pregnant. They start getting over 1,000. But for the most part, they're pretty similar to men. Again, it goes up to 400, but
Is the main difference between a male and a female from a hormone perspective, is the main difference just that men have more testosterone rather than there being like a greater absence or more estrogen?
it's both. Yeah.
Little combination of both. Okay.
Oh, yeah. Yep. And I mean, when you talk about male feminization, like say, there's other things. You obviously look at gonads, right?
I don't look at gonads.
Well,
I mean,
in a lab?
Yeah, I caught a peek. I mean, here and there, a guy was squatting. He was in front of me.
I mean, when you go to the bathroom, you kind of peek over at the,
Yeah.
just to kind of measure up yourself, see if you're doing, you're adequate.
Yeah, seeing if you're doing okay.
Yeah.
The old gonad check.
Okay, maybe it's not so obvious. But in the research lab, it's obvious that you would look at gonads to determine sexual differences and sexual changes, and they call it sexual dysfunction, obviously. So, like, for example, they found fish with issues in their gonads.
Right.
And fish have internal gonads, so it's more complicated. And then they start looking in the water, and inevitably in all these different lakes where they find these deformations of fish gonads, they find artificial estrogen chemicals, including birth control. And, I mean, the levels that we're talking about for those chemicals are in the thousands of nanograms per liter.
Shit.
So they're way above our natural estrogen level. So when we're drinking that, I mean, you can argue about how much is absorbed through our gut lining, but
So, like these guys that are driving around with these nuts hanging off the back of their truck, they kind of have a point, right? Are sacs shrinking because of some of these things that are going on?
Yeah. In fact, there's something called anogenital distance, and that's shrinking. Like, that's becoming more and more feminine in males today. There's a lot of things. I mean, most of it's just...
Oh, I have to check around down there now. See what the hell's going on. I gotta get a mirror.
You don't see. Well, you see it basically in the future generations. You won't see that shrink in your own body, hopefully, because that's more of a developmental.
That was a close call.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
But like I say, it's a controversial topic because a lot of people don't even want to acknowledge differences between men and women to begin with.
Right.
But obviously, there's differences, and scientists that are being real honest, they're noting these differences, and they're also doing experiments with atrazine, for example, right? Like if you looked up atrazine and male feminization, you'll find papers on different animals. You don't want to do this in humans, obviously. You don't want to dose somebody with a bunch of this herbicide. Right. It's a herbicide.
Got it.
And they spray it on grains, and it causes male feminization at frogs at about 200 nanograms per liter. And what's with atrazine, right? So if you put 200 nanograms per liter in the water, you get a male frog start turning into a female frog.
Wow.
And what's crazy about that is the EPA allows 3,000 nanograms per liter of atrazine in our drinking water supply. So how much of an impact is that having on us? I mean, and I think the biggest way that we see it, practically speaking, we see this feminization in males today is through motivation, because that's where the studies are real clear. If you give, again, during the developmental stage, you're going to change these things like anogenital distance and these weird things, right? But you see, if
Can
you
affect more general things as well.
in adults, it affects motivation. So if you give an adult rat a bunch of these artificial estrogens like BPA or phthalates or whatever estrogen chemical, it drops off their motivation, sex motivation, but also just general motivation, to do anything. And I think that's what you really see in our culture today. You see a lot of men that just aren't motivated to do anything.
That's why people tune in. They're like, I need to get hyped up. And, I do a lot of these podcasts I do on my own as well. And I try to walk people through, this kind of recipe of how to kind of stay motivated, how to stay out in front of things. I try to teach people you do have a lot more control over things. And I don't know a lot of the science behind it. I don't know, dopamine and all these different things that go on in your head. But I do know that the more that you can try to get ahead, if you can figure out a way of even just, and you don't have to be ahead of everybody else, you just need to be ahead of yourself. So if you can figure out a way of kind of going through a checklist every day and hammering it out the best that you possibly can, let's say you get 5 good tasks done every single day, the better that you start to master that, the more momentum you're able to get. And I'm sure even that process sends a cascade of different hormones that are probably going in your favor. Even something as simple as I really heavily recommend that people start to prepare their foods, and people start to, now there's intermittent fasting and there's different things, but you should still know, like children don't leave the house without mom or dad saying, hey, you got your lunch? Or the kid eats at school or whatever the case may be. But adults leave the house with they don't have anything set up. And the reason why I think it's important is because there's a lot of, it sounds silly to say it, but there's a lot of stress and anxiety about, hey, where do you want to go eat for lunch today? You're like, well, I don't know. And maybe I'm trying to eat a certain way, and you're trying, now we really don't know where to go. We only have an hour. Our boss is going to be pissed if we're gone any longer than that. Parking's a pain. It just causes this cascade of problems. And we've talked about these little things, like you may lay out your clothes the night before, just these little tiny things. Now, I'm not going to say that that's necessarily going to build testosterone and you're going to be this, burly person or whatever your goal is. But it will build willpower and it will help you get ahead and help you stay ahead. And when you get in that position, you don't really need external motivation. It's a lot of it's coming from within because you want to do more, because you want to try to become more.
Yeah.
And I agree 100%. I mean, I'm seeing it left and right. I got people that come up to me at trade shows and stuff, and they're crying. And I'm saying, hey, man, I didn't force you to listen to my shit. I know it's boring. You don't have to cry out loud about it. No,
Stop drinking tap water.
Yeah,
You're getting estrogen all over the place.
But they're very emotional about the fact that they can't seem to find their way, or that we help them find their way, or any of those combinations of things.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the aspects of marijuana here in California that a lot of people are overlooking, is that the marijuana smoke can act like estrogen. So eating it, fine. They've done a bunch of studies.
Right.
But for some reason, when you smoke it, it has an interaction. It acts like estrogen.
Wow.
And I include that in my book, which is, of course, not particularly popular, but it's just a fact I want people to know, especially in teenagers. And I think that's one of the dangers and the risks of
Joe Rogan
teenagers.
somewhere, he's getting pissed.
He's calling bullshit.
No, and I've done a YouTube video on this recently because that's a big problem if you're trying to motivate yourself,
Right.
and you're struggling, but you're continuing to do something that, like ingesting a chemical that's acting like estrogen, that's inhibiting your motivation, then it's a completely uphill battle, right? And again, I think that's one of the reasons they find that's a big factor with teenagers using marijuana. And again, I have no issue with marijuana. In fact, CBD is really, unbelievably healthy, anti-inflammatory. Yeah. And I think there's even a positive interaction between THC, which is the chemical that makes you high,
Right.
and CBD, which is the anti-inflammatory compound in marijuana, which is kind of overlooked. Those two in concert act in a positive way. And I think, I've been doing a lot of digging into that topic, but every time you dig deep into it, you see a lot of teenage motivation / infertility that are related to, apathy, that kind of thing, that are related to them smoking marijuana.
There's so much to this story. It's really it's really wild. You have something to add to that, Andrew?
Yeah, no, I was just gonna ask, how fast would that affect somebody?
It's a good question. Probably differential,
Because
right?
old Billy back in the day, he had one marijuana cigarette and then he turned into a chick. No, but like, you know what I mean? Like, is it like a continued use? Like, I think if you dig a little bit deeper in it, I think it's a really cool topic because there's a lot of weed heads that it doesn't bother me. It doesn't do anything to me. You know?
Yeah, there's a couple things, right? So one of the services that I provide people is 23andMe DNA analysis. And I recently, for example, did Ben Pekulski's DNA on air, you know.
Nice.
And one of the things that I look at when I'm doing DNA analysis is your genes involved in marijuana processing. One of those is estrogen. How does your body deal with estrogen? One of those is paranoia. How paranoid might you get just based on your genetics? We all differ in that regard. The gene is called AKT1. It's pretty well established. The scientists usually call it psychosis because that sounds a lot more negative, because there's a lot of negative context with marijuana in the scientific community, which I think is BS, but it's just a historical fact. But paranoia is one. Estrogen, like I said, is one. And then another one is schizophrenia, right? You want to look at the genes involved in schizophrenia.
It's crazy. You can find out all these things through your genes.
Yeah.
Through just
well, some of it's genetic
testing.
and then some of it's environmental. So everybody's going to have somewhat of an estrogen response, in my mind, from the marijuana smoke. But if you've got great genetics to handle estrogen, to break down those chemicals, then you break it down quick and it doesn't impact you that much. But if those compounds are staying in your body a lot longer, you're going to have a longer impact. You know what I mean? And then there's just another study done, you know, literally just a few months ago on epigenetics with marijuana.
Can you explain what epigenetics are?
Yeah, so epigenetics are marks on your DNA. It's kind of like tattoos on your DNA. And
Understood.
and that was a big breakthrough in science when they discovered epigenetics. And the way they discovered it was through the Dutch hunger winter. It's called the Dutch Famine or the Dutch hunger winter. The Nazis apparently blocked off the food supply in the Netherlands. And there was a whole population of people, literally like 1 million people that were starving for a whole year. And then, boom, they got food.
And they died, right?
Well, a lot of people died, but then the people that survived through that, the ones that had babies that in their womb, you know, the ones that were pregnant during that hunger winter, of course they had smaller babies, right? Because they were starving. But what blew scientists' minds was that the babies of those babies now, which are coming out now, they're smaller. And that doesn't make sense, right? Because with DNA, you know, mutations take decades, you know, generations, really, hundreds of generations usually. But in this case, we're seeing a change right away. And it's not through nutrition, because these babies now, they've got plenty of nutrition, but they're still smaller. And that's how they discovered epigenetics. These marks on the DNA actually get passed on.
Right. So this is something I've wondered forever. Can you make marks on your own DNA?
Yeah.
That you pass on, good or otherwise?
Yep. And that's one of the reasons I love choline. You know, we started off talking about choline.
Yeah.
And the reason it bothers me so much that my body doesn't handle choline very well, and it's probably not choline, it's probably some byproduct that's also in there, or something like that. But choline is a super beneficial, positive regulator of epigenetics. It changes marks on your DNA in a positive way, and those get passed to your future kids.
Wow.
Damn.
You know, and that sticks with you. So similar with sulforaphane, which Rhonda Patrick was always talking about. The reason and by the way, I work in the lab at Mayo Clinic with the guy who discovered that, or he probably co-discovered it, but he's published a million papers.
That's crazy.
Yeah, he's from Germany, and the reason sulforaphane is so darn good for you, it changes those marks on your DNA. That's the root cause of why it's so beneficial. So not only does it improve you for years and years to come, it improves your kids because you actually pass that on. So epigenetics has been just, you know, completely overlooked because we didn't even know what it was until recently.
It's such a crazy thing. My son has kind of asked me about that, like, you know, because I lift, you know, is he somehow affected by that? You know, is he affected by,
Yes. Yep.
you know, is he going to be stronger or whatever, you know, stuff like that.
Yeah. Yep. And I think even your gut bacteria impact your future generations, because those get, you know, your gut bacteria carry those marks. You know what I mean? Like bacteria they have marks on their DNA.
Right.
And that gets transferred to the maternal bacteria So it's like a memory. It's kind of like an organism, a single cell memory.
Right.
And it's really powerful. When we discovered that bacteria have kind of their own immune system, have you heard of CRISPR?
Yeah. And that's all that shit's pretty wild. I don't understand it, but it's
yeah. Well, the reason we have CRISPR today, and what CRISPR is, if you don't know what it is for people out there, it's basically gene editing technology. It uses a guide RNA strand. It cuts a piece of DNA, and then you put in an RNA, and it kind of like a template that you want the DNA to be. And it basically changes the DNA into a way that you want. It's editing. Right. That's exactly what it is.
So do we possess the ability right now to kind of like
modify DNA?
Modify DNA and have it
sure.
but we are not doing that. Just
on humans.
We're not messing with it yet.
In China, they probably. No, I do it in the lab. I've used CRISPR myself on cells, right? Human cells in the lab. The problem with CRISPR that most people overlook is that it has a lot of off-target effects. So you think you're just cutting the target sequence of DNA, but then you also end up cutting hundreds of other spots on the DNA.
Well, there's, it's just, this happens all the time. And, for every like effect, there's like a defect, right?
Exactly.
And sometimes the defect of something is the effect that you're looking for. I've seen this a bunch of times with supplementation. Somebody will find like this peer-reviewed, paper will say, hey, this works a lot better with, glucose or sugar, basically, in some way. And the effect that they're going for after they kind of found this research or this study, they didn't realize that maybe long-term use, or they didn't really realize it would cause this cascade of other things. So while you may be getting might be good for the moment, it might be causing a problem like down the road, or like who knows what. Maybe this is just a random example, but saying like ingesting 50 grams of carbohydrates post-workout, yeah, maybe on a piece of paper that does look good. And maybe it looks good for 6 weeks, maybe it looks good for 8 weeks. But maybe over a period of time, maybe your body starts to reject it. I mean, our bodies, it's way smarter than we could ever possibly imagine. This machine that we live in every single day, it always seems to do like the opposite of what you want it to do.
Yeah.
You try to make it do something, it's like, nope.
Well, in science is always, like the LDL is another good example, or cholesterol, because that's such a sinkhole of scientific information where we thought we had it figured out. And then we realized, there's these different particle sizes.
Yeah.
So we thought we had that figured out. And then we realized, there's LP little a, and that should really matter, but it doesn't really matter in certain context. There's all this complicated additions on top of additions, and like I say, it's a sinkhole, and it's led a lot of people off.
Heart disease is a great example because if you have one marker that's off for heart disease, let's say that you're, I don't know, you say you have high LDL. There's potential that there could be some danger to it, and you might need to investigate further. But most likely, like if you don't have symptoms, and if you are relatively healthy and you're training and you're doing all these things, you don't have any other signs that you have any sort of heart problem, you're probably okay. Even if you go and you determine, you find out that you have higher levels than expected, you may want to keep poking around because it is your heart and you don't want to take that lightly. Yep. But usually there's like 3 or 4 different things going on at one time that's kind of setting you up for disaster.
Yeah, well, I think inflammation is always at the root cause of that. But I mean, the point is, right, scientists oftentimes, make that single discovery that they think is everything, CRISPR.
Yeah.
We've got it figured out. Now we can edit DNA. And then you realize, there's all this other stuff. And it's great in the lab. I can change genes in and out and modify different genes. And that's awesome in a dish. Mm-hmm. But to actually do that on a fetus or something, I mean, that's pretty ethically sketchy. But again, people are doing that already in China and things like that.
They are. People are doing that already.
Oh, yeah.
Are there people walking around that have had that done, do you think?
I doubt it. But it's going to happen. That's probably going to be the new wave of doping, changing your myostatin gene or something.
What about doing that in animals? Like, let's say for like a cow, to kind of have the perfect cow, like for meat, and for, are things being done like that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Go ahead and crank that thing way down.
Yeah, I feel like my microphone.
Might need to get a counterbalance on there.
Maybe just keep cranking. Keep going. Yeah, buddy.
Just the squeak.
It's all this, right. All this estrogen is leaving his microphone kind of limp.
Exactly. That microphone stand is a perfect example of what's happening in America right now with estrogen levels.
Flaccid microphone stand.
Yeah. You ever mess with because you're saying I sorry to totally change the subject, but with it's tripping me out that you're saying choline gives you headaches.
Me personally, and a lot of people, because Joe Rogan mentions that on his podcast with his On It.
Yeah.
What's it called? Alpha Brain. Yep, he talks about that.
Because I've heard of people taking too much of the racetam family.
Yeah.
So they'll have pramiracetam without enough choline, and that gives people headaches.
Yeah, that's probably because it uses choline. There's actually a gene too. It's called COMT.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the mutation is V158M. You can look at your 23andMe data, and it actually determines whether you metabolize that properly.
Yeah. Do you think you just have a shit ton of acetylcholine running through your brain?
I don't know. I don't even want to speculate because I'm not even sure if it's the choline or if it's some contaminant in there.
Mm-hmm.
But
do you think everyone should have a 23andMe test? Do you think it provides you with some, you think it provides you some good information that can be really useful?
I wouldn't do it if I didn't, and I've done it for my family, my extended family, because what I always say is knowledge is power, right? If you understand, and that goes from, that's what Socrates learned, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years ago when he was Socrates.
A long ass time ago.
Yeah.
And Socrates.
I mean, Socrates. Yeah, Bill and Ted.
Yeah, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure.
Yeah. What do they say? Strange things are afoot at the circle. Okay. But when he went to the Oracle at Delphi, I've been there. I've been to Greece. I learned the Greek language. It took a couple years in college. I was a classics minor. And this
Oracle, guy went to a lot of school and stuff. We're in a lot of trouble.
Well, the Oracle at Delphi, he said to Socrates, "You're the wisest man in the world." And he says, "No, I'm not. I don't know anything." And the guy said, "Well, that's why you're the wisest man, because you know yourself."
Right.
A lot of people think they're wise, but they're not. And the real irony is when I went to Delphi, apparently there's a natural gas leak there. And so the Oracle was probably just high all the time from methane gas or something, which is a different topic. But that was pretty funny. When I went there, they were just discovering that.
Interesting.
But I think the words of wisdom were that he knew himself, and that's a philosophical knowledge. But you can take that physically too and say, okay, how do I do in terms of power training? How do I do with endurance training? How does my mind work in this situation? Or that's all part of knowing yourself, and your DNA is a huge part of that also.
We're all so obsessed with being right that we, don't ever pump the brakes and think, rather than getting mad at some of the information you may give about estrogen, and rather than me getting upset or emotional about it in any way, why don't I just try to think about what you're saying, rather than a lot of times people are kind of balling up their fist. I can't believe he said that. This is not why there's more transgender. I can't believe he even implied it or even went down that road. It's disgusting. I can't believe he said it. And all they're thinking is what they're going to say in response. And it's well, let's hear everything out, and maybe we can all learn something. And maybe there are reasons. I mean, there's so many things that happen in our society that cause this giant cascade of things. If you look at people being obese and diabetes and heart disease and some of these things, there's people are more sick now than pretty much ever. It's gotten to be out of hand. There's more heavy children. There's just more problems with all that. And then somebody might say, "Oh, well, because it's the food pyramid." It's actually look at the food pyramid. I don't think people are getting that fat from just doing the things that are on the food pyramid, from just having some bread and having some fruit and having some vegetables. However, we turn the food pyramid into a mess because people tried to profit off of it, and people started kind of going that low-fat route. And I don't think the low-fat movement is why we're fat either. I think we got fat because people saw opportunity to make money, and they put heart-healthy stuff on a thing of sugar smacks, and they started doing these things because they're low-fat. And then we're thinking, okay, well, that's still, even though that tastes really good, that's still good for me. It has a heart thing on it. and I'm going to go for that. And so some of those things I think did lead us down the wrong road, but we just eat too much.
Yeah.
And we eat in a disgusting way, and we don't really think about it. We're not conscious of it. But I would imagine a lot of these prepackaged foods probably are full of some of these nutrients that you're talking about.
Estrogens, you mean?
Estrogens, yeah.
They're not nutrients.
Yeah, no, not nutrients.
That's the fifth macro. It's
it's
ketones, and then there's estrogens.
And then there's estrogens. Chemicals, I guess you'd say, right?
Yeah, for sure, because they're man-made. They're not found in nature. There was a study done on mitochondrial dysfunction in rats with atrazine, another example with atrazine. And they gave the rats the exact same amount of food. You know, you can control that in these animals. And except one of them, they gave low dose, and I'm emphasizing low dose here. They give them low dose atrazine with their food. And the ones with this estrogen chemical, they got fat. Same exact calories, you know?
Right.
And so anytime a scientist, and that's usually the people you hear this from, the calorie counting, you hear it from the scientists. Anytime you hear a scientist say it's all about calories, you know, you can go to that study, mitochondrial dysfunction with atrazine in rats, and it's a perfect example. I mean, there's other examples too, but estrogen, artificial estrogen causes fat. I mean, and then low testosterone too. You know, I mean, it's always an interesting question. If somebody has low testosterone, you can ask, does that cause them to get fat? Like, say somebody's obese and they've got low T.
Right.
Was it because they had low T and then they got obese, or did they get obese first and then their testosterone dropped out? And the answer to that, I think, is maybe both. You know, in one case, it might be one way, in the other case, it might have been the other way. And there was ways to figure that out. For example, if you lose the weight and then your testosterone is still low, it was probably because you had low testosterone to begin with, and that's why you lost the weight. And hormones are just super important for weight.
Right.
And that's one of the reasons pregnant women, they gain a lot of weight in fat, because it's such an efficient form of energy. That's the body's most efficient storage form. You know, glycogen, not that efficient. You burn it real quick. Fat, awesome. You get 100 ATPs from like a single fatty acid compared to 30 when you're burning sugar.
Right.
So what the tricky thing about estrogen is that if you're ingesting these artificial estrogen chemicals in your Fruit Loops or whatever, they're telling your body store more fat. They're telling your body you're pregnant. You know what I mean?
That's wild.
And you know, there's a reason for pregnancy increasing estrogen and estrogen causing fat storage. It's because our ancestors didn't always have access to nutrition, right? So like if a woman was pregnant, you know, maybe she didn't have the food, you know, maybe it wasn't there.
Right.
So she needs to store more fat. So then if she can't find food, there's energy there for the fetus, right? Whereas today we all have plenty of food. It's not really a thing, but the hormones are still the same. They're still doing the same thing. But what gets really wacky is when us, you know, Mark and Andy and whoever, we're all taking in these chemicals and telling our body, ooh, we better put on some fat, you know, because we're pregnant. That's what we're signaling to our body. And I call it the estrogenic paradox, because estrogen chemicals they tell your body store more fat, and they sit in the fat. They store in the fat. It's like you were talking about, they're fat soluble. So they actually are sitting there, and it's hard to get them out that way because they're in the fat. And the average lifespan of a fat cell is 1.5 years.
Oh, shit.
Yeah, and they can last up to 10 years. They've done radioactive studies with the atomic bomb. You know, these people that were exposed to the atomic bomb, they had all these radioactive chemicals in their body. And they were able to do different studies to show, and there's multiple papers on this showing how long different cells survive in your body. And again, you know, the average lifespan of a fat cell is 1.5 years. So how hard is it to get these chemicals out of your body? It can take years.
Yeah.
Literally.
If you lose body fat, I've always felt, and I don't know if this is true or not, I always felt that was kind of a very natural way to detox your body.
Yep. It's probably the best way. Yep.
Yeah, because, I mean, if these parabens and estrogens and all these weird things are kind of getting caught up in this fat tissue, it would make sense, like if you lost 20 pounds, 30 pounds, that you're ridding your body of a lot of these things.
For sure. And one of the interesting things, and this is a little bit off topic, but I'll bring it up anyways because it's interesting. A lot of people that I consult for, they're taking these psych meds these days, you know, like clozapine or whatever. And a lot of them just balloon, right? They get super obese real quick. They're skinny, and then they'll go up to 300 pounds. And the reason for that is your body has never seen these chemicals. They're man-made, and it thinks they're poison. And so you're protecting your brain because your brain cells die real easy, right? They're real sensitive. Neurons are real sensitive cells. So what you do is you make fat cells to store that drug, to put it somewhere safe, right? So the fat cells are actually important because your body needs those to buffer against killing your nerves, or killing your brain cells. So, in that sense, your body is, 2 thumbs up. You're doing the right thing. Your body thinks you're doing the right thing, even though the drugs aren't technically poison. Your body thinks they are, so you get all this extra fat. But then, when you try and get rid of that, especially if you continue taking the drugs, or if you continue eating the parabens or whatever, and there's parabens in the food. They're not just in the personal care products. One time I went to consult with a NHL hockey player from the Lightning team down in Florida, Tampa, and I literally brought a package of corn tortillas, because on the ingredient label, there was like 4 different parabens: methylparaben, propylparaben, butylparaben, in the food.
It's in the ingredients.
It's like you don't think these estrogens are all over the place.
Yeah.
It's nice to have a little visual aid sometimes when you're making a point. And it's hard to believe, but if we keep eating these things or drinking them or rubbing them on our skin, because they're going through our skin, they're fat soluble, they're happy to go through the skin, just like testosterone cream goes through the skin. They're going through, they're storing in the fat cells, they're telling your body make more fat, store more fat. It's hard to get it out, and that's one of the reasons saunas are so darn beneficial, because you're sweating that out. They've done skin patch testing. Have you ever heard of this?
Can sweat out some of the toxins, right?
Yeah, they have patches that are like nicotine patches, but they don't have nicotine. They're just blank patches, and they put them on people. And they have groups of people that sit in the sauna, groups of people that don't sit in the sauna. People that are in the sauna, they take those patches off, and they're full of BPA and phthalates and all this junk, because you're sweating it out. You're getting it out of your fat cells. You're moving those molecules faster. That's why water boils up steam, It's moving the molecules faster.
Shit's extremely fascinating. Back to what you said about the calories, this calorie in, calorie out equation. What I've always been frustrated with is that, calories are our only measure, and I would agree that under normal circumstances, calories, not even under normal circumstances, they always matter to some extent. You can't just go hog wild and eat whatever you want, even if you have a healthy body, However, though, I think it stands to reason that if we can, figure out ways to make our body more efficient and figure out ways of allowing our body to burn more calories through something like gaining muscle, then we should also understand that if we tweak the natural hormones in our body in the wrong direction, that it's possible that we may need fewer calories. And if we tweak them in our favor, such as adding testosterone, which will help build muscle, we can also kind of alter some of that. So in the case of, somebody that their estrogen levels start to get high, or they're ingesting, foods that are really just crappy for them, they have these bad habits, but their caloric intake stays the same, they definitely can pack on some body fat, and they might have to adjust for that, so it's like, again, you will have to still probably, figure out some sort of reduction in food or a different plan. And that's always been my argument too, against some of the, if it fits your macros style of dieting and flexible dieting. And I'm a fan of any form of dieting, anything that gets people excited to follow something. But the more that you stay on track with things that aren't insulting your metabolism, things that aren't dangerous for you, probably the better off you're going to be. I mean, I think we know that deep down inside.
Yeah, that's where the motivation kind of comes full circle too, because if you're taking in these chemicals, number one, you can't eat as many macros.
Right.
And then number two, your motivation goes down to actually stick to anything.
Right.
And so it's an uphill battle from all kinds of different directions. And so it seems silly that, people would even want to keep hitting these chemicals, putting them in their body.
Right.
And I think the biggest problem is people just don't even know, like a lot of people know BPA is bad just because things say BPA free, but they don't realize it's bad because it acts like estrogen. And phthalates are the same way, it's like, oh, you go BPA free, but then you've got phthalates, And those are
it's just another way for somebody to still be able to sell you something that's still not great for you.
Exactly.
Basically, right?
Yeah.
So phthalates might still be in your drinking water that you have from just plastic bottles or whatever.
Yep. And I mean, and they're even putting them in personal care products. So people are rubbing them on their skin. I mean, the FDA has this long laundry list of personal care products, and then they tell you how many phthalates are in all these different products. I mean, they're very well aware of the presence of these chemicals, and even BPA. Scientists are very well aware of how prevalent they are. I mean, you almost can't find a person without BPA in their body. You do these urine tests and you find it. And their studies, I cite in my book, they had to go to these native tribes in Alaska to try and find a control group because, what happens if you don't have BPA? We don't know because nobody has no BPA. Right. Everybody's got this stuff in them. So you got to go to friggin' Alaska, but then you've got this totally different genetic background. And who knows what you're really studying? You're studying these people out living in the wild, probably in other ways. They're all kinds of healthy in different ways. So, it's a tricky situation these days with all these chemicals. And what really gets to me as a scientist is that people in labs and, across the board, this is true of chemicals. What we do is we do toxicity studies. So we're looking at how toxic is BPA, how toxic is a phthalate, right? Or paraben or whatever. And what that means is how quickly does it kill a cell or how quickly does it kill a mouse, So you got to give them 100 grams to kill them. Right. And it's as safe as table salt because, table salt, you give them 100 grams and then that kills them. The problem with that thinking and that logic, and that's super ingrained in science, this idea of like, well, let's check the toxicity. And if that's okay, then we're okay.
Right.
The problem with that, it totally ignores a couple things. It ignores bioaccumulation. So it ignores the fact that we store this stuff in our fat. So we can eat a little bit today, eat a little bit tomorrow, eat a little bit the next day. And now all of a sudden we've got 3 times the amount in our body that we had the first day because we're accumulating it. That's one thing we overlook. The other thing we're overlooking is epigenetics, right? So we're actually changing marks on our DNA. And that's why I called my book Estrogeneration, because we're passing estrogen on. It's changing future generations.
Shit, man. So
it's a real problem.
What are some things that we can do? Like there's estrogen in our foods. It's surrounding us.
Well, that's why the whole food diet works so well, right? Because the more processing you do, the more the chemicals you end up putting in. It's almost carte blanche way to get rid of these chemicals is just to get whole foods. That's the first thing. And meat is usually packed in plastics and whatnot. When I bought a cow this past year because I ran out of venison. And I know the butcher. I told him, hey, I want it wrapped in butcher paper. I want it in wax paper, not soy-based wax paper, And they do that, and that's pretty standard. But I was very emphatic about it. But even if they're wrapping meat in plastic, it's not liquid, so there's not that much transfer. And the problem is if you've got liquid, there's a lot more transfer. If you've got oil, there's even more transfer because these chemicals are oily. They'll transfer into oil a lot faster.
It doesn't cook out.
No, you can't boil it or anything. They've done studies on like extreme heat with BPA, for example. There's no loss of the BPA.
It's just there.
Yeah, it's a very hardy chemical.
Yeah.
That's why one of the reasons plastics, last so long. It's designed that way. So I think just switching, like I say, going towards the whole foods, going towards personal care products that just don't have these estrogens in them to begin with. It's not that difficult. It's just the awareness. I feel like the breast cancer awareness thing is way overdone, right? Like, oh, we got to raise breast cancer awareness. Let's dress everybody up in pink like newborn baby girls on the football field, like Bill Burr says. It's like, well, that's not really accomplishing. Just the fact that we know breast cancer exists, and it's up 250% since 1980, by the way. And by the way, artificial estrogens, all these things increase your risk for breast cancer. Let's talk about that. Let's not just say that it exists and that it's going up. Let's figure out why. And at least with artificial estrogens, raising awareness, I think, is more important because once you have the awareness, then you say, oh, I should filter my drinking water. Activated charcoal gets rid of all these chemicals. That's not that hard to do. Like a Brita filter has activated charcoal. You know what I mean? It's not that hard.
Right.
It kind of motivates people to just pull them out of their life.
And meanwhile, here we are, always trying to search for like a cure, which would be fantastic. But maybe we can
good luck with that.
Yeah, maybe we can. I
prevent
I
it.
don't know if we can eradicate it that way, but like maybe we can. Yeah, a lot of people could dodge it, perhaps.
Yeah, I think that's what you have to do. You have to be a little bit more proactive, because in the United States we have a lot of issue with money influencing politics. That's why, in my book I also aligned Europe's laws with America's laws on all these chemicals. And you go down the list, it's like parabens. Yeah, China has tighter regulations on parabens than the United States. Europe, atrazine is totally illegal. Here in America, we use millions of pounds of atrazine every year. It's the second most used herbicide after glyphosate, after Roundup. These chemicals are just everywhere in America, and in Europe, most of them are illegal or they're regulated. Another really important one to mention is the one found in grain. It's mycoestrogen. It's called mold estrogen. So mold, one of the reasons it's so unhealthy, like when you get remediation, you got to come in with like a biohazmat suit and stuff. You don't even want to breathe it in.
Right.
It's because the mold secretes an estrogen chemical, and that'll totally whack out your hormones, just like Agent Orange or something. And grains these days have a lot more of that mold than they used to because of our giant, storage facilities. And in America, we don't even have an upper legal safety limit for zearalenone, which is the mold estrogen, mycoestrogen. In Europe, they regulate it real carefully. And not only they regulate it in human food, they regulate it in animal food. So like if the cow's feed has a certain amount of mold, it's not even allowed. They're not even allowed to feed it to the cows. What they do is they ship it over here and put it in your cornflakes, because there's no limit.
Is there any chemicals that people have been exposed to that are, I guess, positive, like like Incredible Hulks type stuff, like gamma rays, or has there been anything
interesting?
Because
like a man-made chemical or an artificial?
Yeah, like like you're talking about all these things that are just kind of now in our environment. Is there or anything
more complex than like caffeine, right? You're talking about.
Yeah, like I know like there's that chemical DNP. I don't know if you ever heard of that before. DNP is like I don't even know if people use it anymore, but it's like a bodybuilding, like fat burning drug.
Okay.
And my understanding of like the way that it was found is like these factory workers were exposed to it. Their body temperature would get really hot for being exposed to this chemical.
It's like a brown fat activator.
And it somehow uncouples your fat or something like that.
Yep. It's called UCP is the protein, uncoupling protein.
And so this chemical is found in like pool chemicals and different things. Now, that's not necessarily a positive thing, but it could potentially, burn a lot of fat off of people. I mean, this particular drug was known for like burning like a half a pound of fat off of people per day. And it's wild shit, but it does change your body temperature. It's not like just a thyroid med, which might have this tiny. It's like you have a fever all the time, basically. Yeah. It's like a small fever.
Wow.
Your body's like cooking. So are you aware of anything like, as people have been exposed to something that has led to, I don't know, research of something positive? Or has it all been pretty
gloomy?
It's all been pretty damaging, huh?
I can't think of anything.
Yeah.
That's a cool question. I've never been asked that question, so I haven't really thought about it. And probably I'll get something in the comments, and that would be cool.
Right.
If somebody knows something, I'd love to know.
Yeah, like these factory workers were doing something, and all of a sudden, like 6 weeks later, they all got jacked out of their minds.
Abs. I was going to ask, you kind of touched on it a little bit, but in raising estrogen levels in a male, it's going to make us, less motivated, probably gain more fat or whatever.
Yep.
What does it do?
Fat and sad.
Fat and sad, yeah. I think, that's one. We can't have one without the other. What does it do for females?
Yeah, sad is important because it does cause depression. Like even children that had higher BPA in their urine, there's an association there with higher depression rates, extremely higher.
Yeah.
But I'm sorry, the question was with
women?
With women?
Because I'm just thinking like a bunch of dudes are just like, oh shit, I can't have estrogen, but females like, okay, well at least I'm okay because I naturally produce it.
That's super common. That's a big question I get is, okay, yeah, I get that the men are impacted because we don't want estrogen.
Right.
But that's why it's so important to realize that women don't have that much more estrogen than men, right? Like between 20 and 400. So the most they usually have is up around 400. That's not like 10,000 compared to 20, you know? And what you usually see with women is fat, you know, weight gains that are really difficult to get through, you know, like they plateau on weight gains.
Now, do you think it's important to also share that, like, you know, okay, the estrogen may have played a role here, the artificial estrogens that you're taking in from the foods you're eating, but at the same time, like,
there's a lot of factors.
There's a lot of factors, and there's still things we can do about it. So, because I see a lot of people like, I got a thyroid issue, and they're just like, they just give up. And maybe they do have a thyroid issue, but maybe it's because of these estrogens. Maybe it's have you seen anything like that where it's like causing problems with or your thyroid?
TSH.
Maybe it's messing up your insulin and glucose levels and things like that.
Yeah. Soy especially causes a lot of thyroid problems.
God damn it! Here comes soy again.
Yeah. I know you love soy so much, Mark. But...
Yeah, my son was he's like terrified of soy. Like my wife puts soy on the table because sometimes we'll have rice with dinner or something, and he's like, "Get that the hell away from me! I don't want to turn into a girl."
Well, what's funny about soy? So they did a study in Canada with over 100 food items, and they were just looking at plant estrogen, phytoestrogen they call it, and all the plants. You know, all of them were under 1,000 nanograms of phytoestrogen per 100 grams of food, but just never mind the units, just 1,000 units. They were under 1,000 units, except for soy and flax. And those were both over 100,000.
Oh my God.
So, I mean, soy and flax are both incredibly high in estrogen, but get this. So soy sauce, after you actually ferment it, not the fake stuff that they pretend like they ferment it, real soy sauce is under 100. So soy over 100,000, soy sauce under 100.
Oh.
Soy sauce is good. Any natto, anything, right? These fermented soy products, tempeh, I guess, is one of them.
Right.
Those are all fine because you're fermenting it. The bacteria, the microorganisms break those estrogens down. They love to break that stuff down. You know, that's what they do. And that includes your gut bacteria. That's why people are different people are affected by soy differently. Because how healthy is your gut? Well, I don't know. I mean, as a scientist, it's hard to predict. You know,
that's insanely interesting. Could you potentially do that to other foods to make could you ferment foods to make it eat up the shitty chemicals that are in there? Potentially.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, flax is another good example. If you're soaking it and things like that.
Oh, okay.
Like sourdough bread, since it's kind of.
Yep, the bacteria. Yep, these little microorganisms, the yeast, they break all kinds of stuff down, glutens and things. But but it's difficult to predict, right? Because the different microorganisms you might have are going to do it differently. What's really interesting about soy and flax is some of the breakdown products are actually healthy for you. So if you do have a great gut, you can break those estrogens down, and then it's actually healthier. But then you study the next guy taking soy, and he gets man boobs. You know what I mean? Like. So in my mind, a lot of people ask me this, and I just say, I'd avoid soy.
Right.
I mean, let's be honest. Except for soy, like if it's fermented, I'm fine with it. But straight up soy, I'm not.
What about like edamame? Isn't that soy?
That's fermented.
Is that soy or is that?
That's soy. Yep.
But it's fermented usually.
Yep.
Miso soup.
Yeah, I think that's fermented. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you can look it up, but yeah, so that's a huge important factor for your son. Make sure it's fermented.
Right. Yeah.
It's non-alcoholic.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is there any estrogen in rice? Just like plain white rice?
Nope.
Okay, so we're good there.
Yep.
Cool.
Most foods don't have estrogen. Again, with the plants. So some people say, well, soy's got a lot of estrogen, right? Well, so does chickpeas. Chickpeas are 9. They have 9 micrograms. Soy's got over 100,000. It's not even in the same ballpark.
Right.
You know, like you can just go down the list and it's just astonishing how low most plants are.
Right.
And these days you can't trust people's gut bacteria. You know, we're not living out in the wilderness. We're not running around, you know, eating dirt and just living healthy. We're stressed out. We're eating a lot of processed garbage, a lot of sugar especially. It's throwing off our gut bacteria. And we're not processing. You can't assume that somebody's going to process the soy estrogen very well. So in my mind, it's just not worth the risk. And you were asking about women. Breast cancer, right? That's a big one for women. Depression is a big one. Fat, like we talked about. And then the other one that connects with women and men with artificial estrogens is infertility, which we're seeing a lot of these days. You know, infertility is definitely on the rise. And
what is this doing to our like physiques? You know, because I see, I see a lot of guys that just, they have kind of a womanly build. They got small shoulders and big boobs and wide hips, and you're like, I don't know what happened to that guy.
Big butt.
Almost every one of those guys, every time
they're pregnant.
Every time I have those guys in my consulting practice, they've got problems metabolizing estrogen. Sometimes they have high SHBG genetically as well. So that binds up all the testosterone. So then your body can't use it because it's got too much of the testosterone is in the limo. Right. And it's not getting out to your cells. But more often than not, I see problems breaking down estrogen. And that includes artificial estrogen. So for those people, I always get real extreme. And, and I want them, avoiding plastics like the plague. I want them really cleaning up their personal care products more than the average person, because the average person, it's not that big of a deal to have some of that stuff once in a while. Your body clears it. The problem is 3 times a day, every day. Then you've got bioaccumulation. It's in your fat. It's just a never-ending problem. Like, I don't want people to get too paranoid about this stuff.
There's Arnold. Yeah. Arnold had a baby. With these changes that you can make in a given day, just as a random example, can you kind of give us an idea of what you've seen in consulting people? Like, how much estrogen are some of these people, in your estimation? How much are they exposed to? And then just by simply removing plastics and doing some of these things that you do, what was the difference, I guess you'd say?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's hard because there's not a standard lab test for BPA or phthalates or parabens or whatever, or all these chemicals. I have a top 10 list in my book, and you just go down and there's no standard lab test for any of them. You have to go into a research lab like the one I work in and actually run out the mass spectrometry and all this. You have to basically start from scratch, which is really expensive, really technically challenging. And it's a lot of work.
Right.
So not a lot of people do it. So what you have to do generally is just go to the studies and say, look, like for example, women that use perfume, pregnant women, they're always testing pregnant women because, the fetus is going to be more exposed and that's going to, have a bigger impact. Pregnant women that use perfume have 163% higher phthalate levels than women that don't use perfume when they're pregnant.
What is that doing to us, dudes?
Probably something if you're breathing in phthalates all the time, but certainly not as much. I tell people don't worry too much about the fragrances if it's on your clothing. Breathing in and not that big of a deal.
What about the fragrances?
It depends on the fragrance.
At the house and stuff like that.
I avoid a lot of the cheapy ones. The cheapy ones.
My wife uses all that bullshit. I'm like, get that out of here. I'm like, I'm a guy. It's supposed to stink in here. Leave it stinky.
No, but
I was gonna say, what about like essential oils?
Yep, the only essential oil that's problematic. Well, there's 2 of them that are
soy oil.
Soy would be a problem. Lavender essential oil.
No.
Is the big one. That one's been studied in multiple studies.
Explains why your nipples have been leaking milk.
My fiance is listening, and we are cutting out lavender oil at night.
Yeah, well,
lavender's gone.
Yeah, lavender is anti-inflammatory, so a lot of people get benefits from it. But there's really good evidence that it acts like estrogen in your body. Multiple studies have been done. They've done it on different brands. A lot of people complain to me because the wellness community that I'm a part of and that I love, a lot of us use essential oils, right? A lot of people out there.
Right.
And they hate that I don't like lavender because all of them are using lavender. Because again, it's beneficial.
It's also not that you don't like it. It's just that it has estrogen.
It acts like estrogen. So I don't like it.
It's just a fact, right? I mean.
No, it is. And there's been more and more case studies with doctors finding children that have man boobs, little boys that have breast development. And as soon as they cut out the lavender, the breast development goes away. Not only does it stop growing breast tissue,
right?
It just shrinks right up. And then they followed that up.
Kind of makes it nice. You don't have to find a girlfriend.
Well, these are like 6-month-old babies and stuff.
Oh my gosh!
And they followed that up. Well, I was gonna say a lot of people complain to me and they say, "Wow, that study just used an off-brand of lavender essential oil." And it's like, well, it's 100% pure lavender essential oil, number one. And you can say that about anything, right? Like any study that anybody ever does, you can always say, "Well, I don't trust the brand or this or that."
Right.
It's like, well, we're not going to get anywhere if you do that to every study. But then number 2, a lot of studies have used different brands and they always find the same thing. And the most important thing they find is in cells. They do it with cells. they find that it triggers the estrogen receptor. And that's kind of the gold standard for me.
So instead of being negative, is there any essential oils that kind of block estrogen?
I don't know about blocking, but I think they all have different positive benefits in different ways. But tea tree oil and lavender are the ones that are sketchy in terms of estrogen. And tea tree oil is not super well established. Lavender, I think, is more and more. They just published another paper this year on it, and it's becoming more and more obvious in my mind that that one is one you should avoid, especially if you're sensitive to estrogen.
Damn.
There's some things that we can ingest. There's a lot of information about like fiber, and one of the guys I've listened to on YouTube is Ray Pete. I don't know if you ever listen to him, but he's got some wild ass information out there. But basically, he kind of talked about eating these certain types of fiber, and how these fibers can actually pull some of these estrogens, these artificial estrogens, can kind of pull some of these things out of our body. Is that true? And what have you seen? Is it effective?
Yeah, a lot of people talk about that with activated charcoal. They say take a charcoal pill.
Yeah.
Right? And it's true. Activated charcoal absolutely binds to artificial estrogens and natural estrogens. The problem is it's in your gut. Just imagine like a pipe going from one end to the other. That's where it is. That's where it stays. So, your gut has blood vessels lining it. So in theory, you can get some that are leaking through your gut, crossing the gut barrier, getting into the activated charcoal. And once they get in there, they're going to stay in there. And fiber can act the same way. But I don't think it's like a super effective strategy. I think sweating is the ultimate. I think that's why saunas are so beneficial in terms of all-cause mortality.
Right.
They improve your health in every parameter.
But even just sweating in general might
be
exactly productive as well.
Yep.
So,
yeah, but most people are too lazy to
you've ever
work up a sweat.
Have you ever seen any studies that show that people that tend to sweat more, that they have less of these problems than others?
I haven't seen the studies. I almost guarantee you that would be the case.
Yeah.
But
yeah, it's because, like Lauren, who we work out with, he sweats his face off,
Yeah, it looks like there's just water dripping on top of his head nonstop. But in thinking about sweat, what about like deodorants? Is that messing us up too? It actually came from one of our live listeners now.
Yeah, it's a great question. It could be, yeah. I mean, it's potentially messing you up. So like if, for example, you're going to work out in the morning, don't put on deodorant, just let that sweat come out and then take a shower and then put on deodorant or something. That would be an interesting strategy. I think, it's fine. I use deodorant, certainly. But there's other chemicals. I think a lot of the fragrances in the deodorants and a lot of the chemicals have artificial estrogens. So you have to be careful what deodorant you use. I don't make any money off any product stuff, but the one I use is called Schmidt's, because I've tried a million of them and most of the natural ones just don't work. They just don't. They're just glycerol based. And you keep sweating. You might as well not even use them.
I made some changes a few years back, under the recommendations of Charles Poliquin, R.I.P., who's passed very recently. But I got rid of some of the parabens. I didn't go crazy. I didn't get rid of every weird cleaning product that I have.
What are you using for deodorant?
I can't remember the brand, but I do have it here with me. I can show it to you.
Yeah.
I'll tell people this. There's a little bit of a period of time where you're going to stink a little bit, so at least that was my experience.
Like an adaptation process.
And then what happened is I actually, and maybe people around me would disagree, I don't even think I need deodorant anymore at all, honestly. Sometimes, I'm here for a long time. We worked out earlier today, so a lot of times after a training session, I'll put it on. But I don't even really mess with deodorant anymore. But I tried. I think the important take home from this is not to freak out, not to go crazy, but to just think about your day, think about all the different stuff that you interact with, and just try to improve upon it.
Yeah, and it's like I said, it's not that hard. A lot of people overdo it. They get way too, like I'm pretty extreme. Like I avoid this stuff pretty carefully.
Right.
And I don't obsess over it. You don't have to. Why obsess over something that you don't have to obsess
over? There's also no guarantee that you're going to live to be 185 years old.
Yeah.
Right? So
not that I know of.
Yeah. What about a lot of us, we do prepare our foods, and a lot of people that listen to the show, we prep our foods.
Yeah.
But the containers. Now I know we can get like glass, but do you feel it's that much more important to get something different to put your stuff in?
Yeah, I'm okay with people putting it in plastic. Plastic number 5 is the best, by the way, if you're looking at the little recycling symbol. Plastic number 1 stands for polyethylene terephthalate, and it looks the best because it's the cleanest look. It's really real crystal clear.
Right.
So it's pretty. Plastic number 7.
I'll write that down. Plastic number 5.
Yeah, plastic number 5 is my favorite. So like if you buy a 5-gallon bucket of coconut oil, like I do every once in a while, you're not going to find it in a glass 5-gallon bucket. You want to find the ones that are in plastic number 5, for example, and then aliquot it out into glass, like a canning jar or something. Right. If you're going to aliquot, that's the scientific term, meaning you just put it in smaller jars.
Gotcha. Yeah, we're like, what?
Yeah. Me and Mark are just nodding. I have no idea what
amazing. You just said. But plastic number 7 is BPA, or BPS, which is just as estrogenic. BPS stands for bisphenol S. They also make BPAF, BPF. They make a laundry list of different bisphenols. So you can have something BPA free, but then it'll be BPS. It'll be just as estrogenic, which is just as bad if it's plastic number 7.
What do you do with your, leftover food?
So I use glass. But I don't travel a lot with my leftovers.
Well, the bottom is glass, but the top will still be plastic.
The top is plastic, but it's not really in contact.
Okay.
But the other thing is, what I was going to say is, I'm okay if people are putting their food, liquids. I'm not a fan, especially hot soup or something. I really don't want to see that in plastics. And is there a study that I can cite? No, but I've seen enough leaching. I've seen enough studies about how much plastic leaches out, even just PEX piping.
Right.
People piping water into their houses in plastic pipes. There's a lot of leaching.
Right.
But what really gets me is when people heat it up. So if you're gonna store your rice in plastic, yeah, that's fine. I don't have a huge problem with that. But I don't want to see you throw that whole thing in the microwave and crank on the heat, because you are going to get a lot of transfer there. I want to see you take that out, plop it on a ceramic plate, put it in glass. So have a plate at your office, you put that on, then throw it in the microwave. Something like that.
Is it like a paper plate okay?
No, because those are coated with plastic.
Okay.
I mean, again, once in a while, no big deal.
Yeah.
I think that's the overall, recommendation that I have is like, don't become a hypochondriac about every little tiny source of plastic. Once in a while, no big deal. I'm traveling, I'm going to be grabbing a paper cup with plastic coating, but I'm certainly not doing this every day, or at least that I'm making a big effort not to. They've even done studies on coffee specifically, and they found, for example, if you have caffeinated coffee in a BPA mug, there's more BPA transfer than if you have decaf. Even just the caffeine molecule can grab out the phthalates, and the BPA, and transfer more out. So it's a complicated thing, and every situation is a little bit different, and it's kind of a deep rabbit hole. But again, you don't need to become a hypochondriac. You can just get rid of the big ones.
Yeah, I'm over here. I'm just thinking, I just ate food out of a plastic container. I'm drinking coffee out of a plastic cup. I'm feeling my chest. I think I'm starting to develop something.
Some man boobs. You're feeling them grow right now.
Yeah, I'm getting a little nervous. So I'm gonna
like Pinocchio's nose.
Exactly.
Well, what happens with a lot of us, because we, kind of do like bodybuilding, powerlifting, and we're feeding ourselves, all day long. The minimum that someone around here is going to eat is like 4 or 5 times a day, if not 6 or 7 times a day.
Yep.
And we, in preparation for that, we prep a lot of our food, and then what do we do with that leftover food? We microwave it, and then now you're doing it. You're starting to really multiply these things. It's happening, 4 times a day, 6 times a day, and so that information is really valuable,
and especially for guys like you that you really can't have that estrogen. There's like an average guy like me, not that big of a deal. I'm not performing athletic feats at a really high level,
Right.
Pro athletes, I do a lot of consulting for. Next week, I've got a guy from the NFL, active player. Yeah. And obviously that guy, don't want him taking in a bunch of plastic. We want to really minimize this stuff, especially if he's got estrogen gene problems. I haven't looked at his DNA yet, but, there's a different grade depending on your lifestyle and your goals and your health issues. Like if you've got estrogen-like symptoms, then maybe, you should maybe be a little bit more compulsive about it. If you don't have any issues, do the big ones and just watch out for your kids.
Yeah. Do you? It's probably a very unsafe practice, but what if we just said, screw it, I'm going to keep living how I'm living, plastic everything.
Yeah.
But I'm just going to start injecting tests to kind of combat the high estrogen levels.
That's funny because I'm trying to work on a book about testosterone because I have a lot of interesting findings about testosterone that a lot of people don't know about, especially raising it naturally. Because one of my pet peeves is when people are injecting testosterone, like hormone replacement. I think that's awesome. But the problem is a lot of people today, they have really low T because they're doing some stupid things in their lifestyle. And rather than fixing it from that end, they're just injecting testosterone. Like, for example, aluminum decreases testosterone. Just like a quick random example. There's 100 examples. Let's throw aluminum in there. Let's say you're cooking on aluminum foil. If you took a hair test, you cut off a piece of your hair, which I don't have, but some people have hair and they can actually do a hair test of aluminum and see how much aluminum they have in their body. And let's say it's really high. Well, that's going to lower your T. But let's say you continue ingesting aluminum and then you're injecting testosterone on top of that. That's a problem because now you're still putting a bunch of aluminum into your body, and that's neurotoxic. It has all these other problems. And then, you brought your testosterone up, but you're doing unhealthy practices.
Right.
So the best strategy in my mind is do everything you can to naturally bring up your T. And if it's still low, then rock on. Like, take the testosterone because it probably is your epigenetics. It's probably marks on your DNA that were passed on from your parents or something like that. And you're behind the 8 ball. Fix it,
Right.
And that's super healthy. I'm a big fan of that.
Yeah, we had a question from Instagram, actually, from Masketti.fitness, and he's just asking, can anyone restore proper hormone levels naturally?
Oh, yeah.
He's asking for a friend, probably not him. He just wanted to
well, it depends,
emphasize
right?
that.
Like I know a lot of bodybuilders I work with, they've been taking testosterone for so long, their body just doesn't even produce it anymore. There's different contexts where people are in different situations, but most people, they have a pretty good shot at restoring it naturally if they're doing the right things. But like I said, if you can't do it, if you've tried everything, by all means, bring it up because it's worth it. And I'm not saying bring it up to 50,000 nanograms per deciliter. I'm saying like get it up to 1,000 or some level that's historically been super healthy. Because at 250, where most men are these days, and trust me, I see the blood tests every day, on these DNA consults I do. It's amazing how many guys are at like 250, 300, and that's just not healthy at all for a lot of reasons. It's a rabbit hole, but it's important to know.
Yeah, plus with all this different stress that you run into during the day, it's just not ideal. Is there anything that we can ingest that would help promote more testosterone, or anything we can do that would help promote more testosterone? And is there anything that we can do that would help decrease estrogen other than just avoiding these plastics and some of these foods?
Yeah, a lot of people, in terms of the second part of your question, they use diindolylmethane, DIM it's called.
It's like from broccoli or something like that, right?
Yeah.
Is that a fiber? I'm not sure.
No, it's a molecule, but
okay.
But yeah, exactly. It's found in broccoli. The problem with that stuff is if you don't dose it properly, it can actually increase your estrogen. And that's the trickiest part about all this stuff we're talking about is, even if you've got high levels of testosterone, for example, if you don't have any receptors to pick it up, it's not going to do anything. Even if your free testosterone is super high.
Right.
And nobody in the medical community, we're not testing testosterone receptors, meaning, it's kind of like antennas on your car. If you don't have an antenna, you're not going to pick up the radio waves and you're not going to get a signal. So even if the radio waves are coming in, all the channels are coming in, hitting your car, if you don't have the receptor, if you don't have the antenna, and again, nobody's testing for that, and that's one of the interesting things. There's a lot of research that's really important being done right now on receptor number, like how many receptors are there, how sensitive are they? Again, that's complicated,
right.
But the problem with diindolylmethane is if you don't dose it properly, it actually increases your estrogen because it increases the receptors. You know what I mean? Right. So your body says, oh crap, my estrogen is getting low.
Right.
Let's actually increase our sensitivity to it. And then you actually end up with more estrogen effects. So you got to be careful with some of those things.
What about like some of the prescribed things that kind of inhibit estrogen, I guess you'd say?
Yeah, aromatase inhibitors I think are awesome. I think those are real important, especially if you're taking testosterone because, your body is trying to turn it into estrogen, especially if you've got a lot of fat, because fat cells have a lot of aromatase, as you know.
Right.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of aromatase inhibitors. I think if you're taking testosterone, you really need to be tracking your estrogen and making sure your body either doesn't convert testosterone to estrogen a lot,
right,
or you just straight up need to get to figure out those numbers so you know how much aromatase inhibitor to take. Yeah.
In consulting some people, have you noticed, body composition changes from mainly just avoiding
estrogen?
Mainly just the avoidance of estrogen and not real concrete, changes in their diet or exercise.
Yep. I mean, it's always hard because
I
always get people fired up and then they get into the gym.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah.
But no, I had one guy recently. His testosterone went up 290% just from avoiding estrogen.
Wow.
And he sent me all the lab stuff, and he's all excited about it. He wrote a blog piece on it, I think. And I mean, that's pretty common, for men.
Do those two have a relationship like that, testosterone and estrogen?
Sometimes,
they
especially artificial.
They run alongside each other, or
not always, not in everybody. It depends on your DNA. But I think the relationship is more related to SHBG, how much SHBG you have. So it's more related to free testosterone.
Right.
So your total usually doesn't change that much, although this guy's did. That was his total. But your free usually changes. And that's one of the best ways to monitor your artificial estrogen exposures is to track your testosterone. So, get a before test your testosterone right now, get off all these estrogen chemicals, read my book, find the top 10 list, whatever, go through that, get them out of your life, and then retest your testosterone. It'll be up, especially your free,
that it seems fairly easy to do. Like, it doesn't seem like you're asking for a crazy compromise in people's life. Now, obviously, they could take it to your level and make it tougher and be harder on themselves. But if you, again, back to what I said earlier, if you're just think about your normal day, not where you're traveling or whatever. Think about your normal day, and then start to kind of work your way into, what does it look like for me to buy this plastic number 5 instead of not paying attention to what I have? What does it look like when I start to use some different containers? What does it look like when I start to avoid some packaged foods?
Yep.
Just, it sounds pretty simple. And even if you still love to eat fast food and all this different junk, I mean, you could still avoid a lot of estrogens and a lot of these plastics, regardless of your maybe poor dietary habits.
Yeah. I mean, just it's always a grade, and you just do what you can in your life and in your situation. I think another number that's valuable for people to know, and another topic that's interesting, is the grass-fed versus standard beef.
Yeah,
that's another big one I get. And one of my favorite studies on that was they looked at cow blood. They just took blood from standard feedlot cows, and just to swing back to the frogs that turned into the male frogs, the princesses. These frogs were turning from male to female at 200 nanograms per liter. They've done studies on cow blood with that same chemical, atrazine, and the blood is at 700,000 nanograms per liter of atrazine. So I think it's important. One of the big ones for people is to just get grass-fed cow, buy a whole cow from a farmer. Like I said, I get 2 chest freezers. They're cheap. They're like $150, which is surprisingly cheap. And then you unplug one as you use it up, and then you just have one running.
So the grass-fed beef may potentially have a lot less estrogen in it.
Yeah, it basically doesn't have any. Yeah.
Wow.
And a lot of the dairy products have a lot of estrogen. That's one of the reasons a lot of people are sensitive to them, because it also messes with your immune system. So if you have immune problems, you want to be more careful with estrogen. The reason for that, again, goes back to pregnancy, because like when a woman is pregnant, you don't want you need to fight off disease. So you need your immune system to be hyperactivated. Estrogen causes increased activation of your immune system, but it also suppresses it because you don't want your body to destroy the fetus, right?
Oh, wow.
So you actually have this weird, they call it, estrogen is immunostimulative and immunosuppressive, meaning it stimulates your immune system and it suppresses it, which makes no sense, but it does.
Right.
And so one of the things about a lot of the dairy products these days, because they're feeding the cows all this corn and all these chemicals, and all the mold in America.
Right.
A lot of people are more sensitive to that, especially with epigenetics, because our parents screwed up and passed on these messed up marks on our DNA. They're getting a lot of skin conditions and things like that that are related to your immune system being off balance. And it's just not, I think if you go and find if you know the farmer and you know what's going on with your beef, it's not that expensive to buy a cow. I mean, in California it is, but it's becoming more and more normal and more affordable, and I recommend that pretty strongly as well.
What is this estrogen doing, like, just to our overall health?
It's different for different people.
Yeah, okay.
It's so variable.
Yeah.
And I mean, like I say, in the population, you can track all of these things, and they're all becoming a bigger problem. You see allergies are increasing, you see breast cancer is increasing, etc., right? We're supposed to be so healthy because we understand all this stuff, but it's like you said at the very beginning, we're actually becoming more and more unhealthy as a culture, and it's chronic. It's not just, one acute thing, like, that comes up and then it goes away. It's just a chronic thing, and I think the reason for that mostly is inflammation. Most people have too much inflammation. And that's not related to estrogen. That's related to that's related to not working out. Right. It's related to crappy diet. It's related to a lot of things, stress. But estrogen is another big one. And I think inflammation is talked about to death, but I mean, the reason I wrote my book is because nobody was talking about it. And I couldn't believe how much research has been done on all this stuff. And I mean, my PhD was on cholesterol and fats and hormones. So I was already immersed in it. And it's really frustrating as a scientist because, like, for example, testosterone was harder to get a hold of in the lab than cyanide. And the reason I know that, I mean, it's amazing. They check every nanogram that you use, all this red tape, all this paperwork, extra paperwork, like it's some kind of illicit, illegal.
That's crazy.
The reason I know that specific example, cyanide, is because the person down the hall, he's a PhD scientist. He killed his wife with cyanide.
Jesus.
He gave it to her in her creatine shake. She was a medical doctor in Boston, and he's in prison now. And I mean, I worked with this guy all the time, and it was ridiculous because he was able to just go and buy cyanide. Nobody cared. Nobody tracked it. He almost got away with it because he tried to get her rushed into cremation and destroy the evidence. But then some nurse noticed that the blood was brighter red than normal. And so she tested for cyanide and found it.
Wow.
And then they went back to his lab and looked at how much cyanide he'd used. And of course, there was a bunch of unexplained missing cyanide, and they finally caught him. But testosterone, you would never have that because they monitor the hell out of you if you're using that stuff. And it's insane.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
That is pretty that is pretty crazy that they care so much about
something that's good for you.
Yeah,
for the most part. It's politics. It's like what your brother talked about.
Yeah,
bigger, stronger, faster. Frankly,
does the estrogen negatively impact a lot of other things? Does it negatively impact your sleep? Does it negatively impact other hormones in your body? Perhaps
not too much. Yeah, I mean.
It's just kind of its own animal, its own problem.
Yeah. I mean, it's mostly relating to your sex hormone balance, your natural estrogen, your natural testosterone, and the impacts that those have.
Right.
Again, if you just think of, okay, what happens during pregnancy, you start thinking like that. Right. Then you say, oh, you get fat gains, sometimes you get depression, right? You throw that estrogen balance off after you have a baby, you get postpartum depression. All kinds of things, right? You get breast development, right? Breast tissue development. Well, that's not something a man wants,
right?
Or even a woman, if your increased risk for breast cancer goes up. And the biggest problem is it takes years,
Right.
I mean,
seems like it also kind of builds on itself because if it's causing you to, loaf around, it's causing you to be kind of sad, then it's going to cause a lot of other problems. And also, too, like, if you could get fat first and you could have an estrogen problem for whatever way it happens, it doesn't really matter. You end up in this situation where you don't feel good about yourself, whether you're fat or not fat, or whether you have a lot of meaning and purpose, or it's almost regardless of what actually is going on. It's actually just the way that you feel. And if these emotions are bad, then everything else is going to be really thrown off, and it's going to promote itself. So I've mentioned that many times on this podcast that, sitting on the couch promotes sitting on the couch. And the hard thing is that when you don't do the thing that you're supposed to do, in exchange for something that's not really that productive, then you're really falling behind because you just did something that had no value. Sometimes entertainment and things like that, sometimes it's hard to place in your brain of like, okay, where does this kind of fit in? And you might be an asshole to yourself about like, hey, should I be just kind of chilling, watching a movie, or should I be like working or doing something? But that's not really what I'm talking about. But I'm talking about, when there's certain things that you should be doing, could be doing to make you better, and you blow them off. And that's the kind of stuff where you start to fall behind. And I just see that time and time again. And that's why we get so many messages here. People are like, looking for, how do I stay motivated? How do I stay on track?
Yeah.
And then I start breaking things down, talking about sleep and how you set up your day. And they're like, I don't understand. How does that have to do with, do you have a song or something? Like, yeah, I got music I can just play, or like, can I just get fired up in the car? Like, you have a supplement, you got a pre-workout supplement.
Yeah, more caffeine, more stimulants.
What about supplementation? What about, vitamins, minerals, different things? Are these capsules, are these things that these things are produced in, are they coming with estrogen as well?
Sometimes.
I mean, they're in plastic bottles a lot of times.
Yeah,
so.
That's a pretty astute question. Most people don't realize a lot of the really high throughput, big, giant pharma companies, they're putting their pills in these capsules, which actually have phthalates in them. Mm-hmm. They actually have estrogen chemicals. And again, these are acting at nanogram levels, so it doesn't take a lot, to trigger the estrogen system. So that's oftentimes, people that are taking 20 pills a day for a million different things, they're actually building up a lot more estrogen response, and they don't even realize that's a component of why they feel so much better when they got rid of all that junk supplements.
Yeah.
And why one of the reasons why you have to be careful what supplement companies you have, and they're trustworthy and all that sort of thing, because it's imperative. It's more important than people realize.
What are some of the main things that we should be avoiding, like kind of by name, and like what are things that you look at, when you're purchasing something, mm-hmm. and let's say you're looking at like a supplement or a new, I'm sure there's some processed foods out there that occasionally you eat just because they're more convenient or taste better or whatever. What are some things that you're looking at as a consumer, to try to steer clear of?
I'm looking out in the woods, walking around with my gun. For real.
Yeah, staying away from everything else, right?
But I mean, when I go to the store, I don't actually. My wife does all the shopping, but she does a good job of getting whole foods. She's a lot better than me. I'm actually pretty bad. If I go to the store, I come out with a bunch of junk.
Right.
And sometimes it's frustrating because you find things that you think are good, and then you get home and you read the ingredients and you realize, oh, there's junk in this. Mm-hmm. So you just do the best you can. I'm not like I said, I'm not super compulsive about it.
Right.
But I do try. I think whole foods are an easy one. And for supplements, I mean, I honestly look to guys like you, Mark, because you have to find people that you trust. It's not just these days, you can't just go to the store and look on the ingredient list, because there's a lot of things they don't have to list. For example, in the personal care product industry, they can use the word fragrance, and they can put all kinds of junk in there under that term, because they have these proprietary formulas, meaning it's like their secret formula, and it's a trade secret, so they don't have to reveal that.
Wow.
And they'll actually put phthalates in there and call it fragrance, because phthalates carry the fragrance farther in the air. That's one of the scientific justifications people used. Oh, we need phthalates in our perfume because it carries it farther, right? In reality, it's just a cheap filler. It's petroleum based. It's dirt cheap, so they're putting a bunch in to make it inexpensive, and then they're out competing other people. And most consumers are just looking at the bottom line. They're just looking at the dollars and saying, oh, this one's 10 cents cheaper, so I'm going to buy that one. You know what I mean? So you have to basically look for people and look for companies that you trust. I think that's the biggest principle when you're looking at things that are not just whole foods.
What about cortisol? How does cortisol kind of play into this?
Even testosterone. Boy, we're really getting shut off of YouTube here.
Yeah. What is that?
Yeah, it's just reconnecting. So sorry about that.
That's okay.
I was actually surprised you guys heard that.
Coming in, coming out.
Yeah, my bad.
No, but cortisol is a complex issue because some people have low testosterone irrespective of cortisol, and some people have it because of cortisol, and a lot of the studies get it all muddled up, and it's hard. A lot of people are just measuring perceived stress as like a questionnaire, like how stressed are you on a scale of 1 to 10, and they're not actually measuring anything, and then they're correlating that to testosterone. So it's a messy area of research. But in terms of estrogen, I don't think there's a real tight correlation. I'm not sure.
How did you get into all this stuff?
In college, I went to college in Florida, and somebody from the local, water treatment plant or whatever, they came and gave an orientation talk. This was way back, and they said that there's birth control in the water, and so you want to filter your water. That's what they said. And I couldn't believe it. I never heard anything like this, right?
You're like, what?
Like, I don't want birth control. I didn't know why, but it doesn't sound like something I want to be drinking.
Yeah, this guy's full of shit. There's no way. Why would the government allow for that?
Crowd control.
Well, what's really crazy, and I'll come back to the water supply in a minute, but they found parabens in polar bears now. They've studied 11. They had 11 polar bears in northern Alaska. They took out their fat tissue, and every single one of them had parabens.
Wow.
And so it goes to show you how pervasive this stuff is, and that's where I've really been trying to be on the front lines and telling people, like, this isn't just harming us as humans. This is harming the whole planet. It's causing infertility in coral reefs. And that's why Hawaii just made sunscreen illegal. And I put sunscreen in quotations because it's not really sunscreen. It's just the estrogen chemicals in sunscreen. It's oxybenzone.
The heck?
Yeah, they're putting these estrogen chemicals that are illegal in Europe, of course.
Mm-hmm.
We've got them in our sunscreen in America.
Yeah.
And it's wiping out coral reefs and all these other animals. And then we're blaming humans, right? We're saying, oh, the polar bear population is way down because of, human interact, like, oh, we're out shooting too many of them or something like that. And maybe that's true. In certain contexts that might be true, but in a lot of cases there's infertility. It's rampant, especially in the oceans where we're dumping all these chemicals.
Yeah, I seen you had I think it was on your YouTube channel talking about milk.
Yeah.
What's going on there?
Well, like I say, these cows, even a lot of the whey proteins these days, they have a lot of these estrogen chemicals because, they're running out the milk in plastic tubing. They're feeding the cows these grains with the zearalenone, mold estrogen. They've got the atrazine. They've got all these different chemicals coming in. And one of the other big ones it's called alkyl phenols. It's a detergent that acts like estrogen. So they put that in a lot of the dairy products. For example, like just standard dairy has about 10,000 nanograms per liter of alkyl phenols oftentimes. And then they're storing it in plastic jugs, right?
Right.
So milk has a lot it's behind the eight ball in a lot of different ways in terms of having artificial estrogen. And the YouTube video, I went through some of that data and talked about the practical effects. I don't even remember the studies that I was citing in there, but just how that impacts us specifically in tangible ways. So here's how much estrogen it has. Here's what you see in people that have more dairy consumption in these studies.
And does it matter like all types of milk, like whole milk, skim milk?
I think a lot of the dairy, just the conventional. I think it's a question of conventional versus grass-fed, free-range, that sort of. Like, I'm a huge fan of Kerrygold butter.
Yeah.
I eat that stuff by the stick, just about.
Does organic make a difference?
Oh, yeah. Yep. And even in the mold, which shouldn't be the case, but it is the case in the studies. The mold is way down in organic products. I think it's just because people give it more care and more attention.
Right.
It's not because they don't store it in giant facilities, which they sometimes do. It's just, it's just the attention that it's given.
Right. And do you think because of that reason that it might be a decent idea too, like if you don't always have the option for grass-fed and all the different things, maybe just to do local as well?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Especially if you get to know the farmers. I mean,
right.
It's outside of a lot of people's, realm, but other people.
You go to a farmer's market or something like that, and you can run into these people actually, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and you can always tell the industrial farmers market, the people at the industrial stand,
right.
And then the people that are actually out there in their own fields paying attention and on top of it. And that's why I like the West NA Price Foundation. I don't know if you've ever heard of them.
I absolutely have, yeah.
Yeah, I'm giving a talk there next week
cool.
at their convention or their conference, and I was really impressed last year when I went to their conference because they have a national network of farmers, and it's really well organized. You can find like your local chapter and then ask them, hey, who's the local guy I can get my eggs from?
Oh. Wow.
And then who's the local guy I can buy my cow from, and go out and meet the guy,
right.
Or woman or whoever it is. And that's what I've done personally, and I've seen that help a lot of people. And because it's organized, it's a good group.
Keep talking. I'm gonna take a pee break. I'll be right back.
Yeah.
Man, so you said in corn tortillas that has a lot of bad shit.
Yeah.
I'm Mexican. I've been eating tacos my whole life.
Yeah. Yeah, you should try and get organic.
That explains why I can't bench 225.
Maybe. I can't bench it either, and I eat organic corn. But I'm pretty particular about corn being organic.
Yeah.
That's one that I don't cheat on. It's, all right, maybe sometimes I do, but for the most part, I buy corn chips that are organic.
Right.
I buy, even if I can't find the organic tortillas, which you usually can't, it's weird, right? You can find organic everything, but then you go to the corn tortillas and you can't find them organic.
They're probably just not popular. People that purchase them don't really care at that point,
Well,
they probably think it's low carb, so it's like, it's fine, just get whatever I want.
Yeah, most people pay no attention.
Whatever's most affordable.
Well, I mean, most of them have parabens and stuff, the corn tortillas, so there's a whole other layer there. But my wife actually makes tortillas. She makes them homemade. I can't remember the stuff.
You didn't bring any. Dude, I would have been all over those things.
Yeah, she presses them on a cast iron thing. And
yeah,
she's the best. But that's one area where I don't cheat too much.
Cool. So like, I remember, I can't remember, it was a documentary a while back where like two dudes, like they did a study on corn and how like it's in everything.
Yeah.
So is that like, is that okay? Or like, I mean,
I don't have an issue. I mean, the corn itself isn't a problem necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yeah, it's really high carb, right? And that's a problem for a lot of people because most people are already way too high carb.
Right.
But, assuming you've got that under control and kind of figured out, I think corn is fine. It doesn't have a lot of these inflammatory proteins in it. I mean, that's the other aspect of dairy, right? A lot of people think they're sensitive to lactose, but they're actually sensitive to casein, which is a protein in dairy. And a lot of the grains have a lot of these inflammatory proteins like lectins and things like that.
Yeah, somebody had asked about lectins. Like, are those okay?
Yeah. It depends, yeah. I mean, in different people, it affects them differently. I'm really interested in that work on lectins, and how it changes your immune system. And I'm also fascinated that glucosamine, this stuff that you find in your joints, actually sticks to lectins. And that's you can take advantage of that by taking a glucosamine supplement while you're eating a bunch of lectins, and it'll bind the lectins so then they don't get out, disperse through your body and mess up your joints for people that are super sensitive to lectins. That's actually one of the last resort diets for people that I consult for that have a lot of genes involved in different joint disorders, either osteoarthritis or rheumatoid arthritis. Osteo just means your joints are inflamed, and rheumatoid means your immune system is eating your joints. And they both kind of feel the same way, but they're different on a molecular level. But a lot of people have genetic issues with their joints in those two categories, and if they've tried everything and nothing else works, I found a lot of success along with Stephen Gundry's lectin-free diet. It's pretty extreme. I don't think most people should be doing it because why eliminate things if you don't have to? Why make your life miserable if you don't have to? But if you're struggling, then it's a valuable tool in your arsenal, I think. Yeah.
There's more and more depression going on, and you hear people talking so much about anxiety and these different things, and it appears that we live in an easier world. Seems like we have easier times than we used to. Seems like technology has helped with a lot of that, but do you think there's a huge link to some of the things that are going on with our food and this depression?
Definitely. Yep. Lower testosterone is definitely linked to depression. High estrogen, especially high artificial estrogen, linked to depression. So those two things right there are what we're dealing with across the board, men and women. Less exercise, depression. You know what I mean? Like a lot of these things are related, and they snowball because, if you're depressed, you don't want to exercise, and then it's harder to get off the couch, and you're smoking the marijuana. So you're getting more estrogen and getting less motivated, more apathetic.
Are there things like in your genetics that could maybe link you to be predisposed to depression?
Oh yeah. Yeah. And those genes are so varied that it's hard for me to just say, like Alzheimer's genes are pretty predictable. It's usually cholesterol related, it's heavy metal related, or it's inflammatory, or sugar. I guess those are probably the four.
Yeah, it's linked to diabetes in some ways, right?
Yeah, sugar, how your brain deals with sugar. Yep. How sensitive it is to insulin and things like that. Yeah, and I did a couple of years of Alzheimer's research, so it's a kind of a fascinating thing for me. But it's unique because, again, we've discovered a lot of those genetic factors, whereas with depression, it's all over the map. You know what I mean? But I think one of the common themes with people that are depressed is definitely these estrogen chemicals. And again, can you find people without estrogen chemicals these days? I mean, it's pretty hard, you know? So yeah, you're not going to find depression in these tribes that are living around the equator or whatever, that are living outdoors. But is that because, you know what I mean? It's there's so many factors there. It's so complicated.
Right.
But you definitely, as you find these chemicals increasing in urine, you find more depression. That's kind of says it all to me. The other thing that's interesting, and I was talking to Chris Bell, your brother, about this, in India, and of course I have a bunch of this in my book, but in India, there's massive suicide rates among the farmers. It's just like astonishingly high, just among the farmers, and it's just a recent thing. And scientists are all baffled by this. And I haven't published anything on this, but there's a lot of publications just documenting this happening, and they're just saying this is what's happening. It's an awareness thing, but they're all saying we don't know why. Maybe it's more alcohol in those communities or whatever. But they're just totally spitballing. They don't really have any answers. They don't really have any data. But what is true and what is data is that they've all been using more and more industrial chemicals, including atrazine, in their in their farming practices. They're becoming more modernized over there, and that's correlated strongly with the depression, so yeah, it's not cause. A lot of this stuff isn't cause, but in human studies, it's really hard to prove cause. So you just have to look at the associations, and when you see it over and over and over again with all these different chemicals, it just becomes it becomes obvious to me, at least, that let's stop arguing about the details and just be honest with ourselves and try and get these chemicals out.
What are some of the things that have surprised you the most in the last couple of years that maybe you didn't recognize, that were, things that popped up where you're like, holy shit, I had no idea that caused that, or that this happened this way?
Oh, man. So many things. I think one example is artificial red dye. Artificial red food coloring acts like estrogen. It's not illegal in Europe. It makes my top 10 list because my top 10 list is all about which chemicals are exposed to every day. Like I said, Agent Orange disrupts your estrogen, but we're not exposed every day, I hope. And, if you were, I'd make my top 10 list. But and that was a good example of how long this takes, right? Because we thought Agent Orange was fine in the scientific world until we started seeing these problems come out 20 years ago. There's even a drug called diethylstilbestrol. It's DES, abbreviated DES. Diethylstilbestrol was prescribed by doctors for pregnant women to prevent morning sickness, but it acts like estrogen. And sure enough, all those babies that were being born, that were, not all of them, but a lot of them had major problems that came out 20 years later, 30 years later. They're infertile, for example. A lot of people I do consulting for, they've had this.
What are some foods that have that red dye?
Yeah, so going back to the red dye, right? Like that's one that makes my list because we are exposed every day. Sorry, I get off topic. So easy. But in Europe, it's legal, but you have to put a big warning label that says it may cause adverse health problems. So nobody uses it. They use beet juice. They use natural beet juice, and that's fine. But over here, we use artificial red dye. So you see these pro athletes drinking, Gatorade with red 40 or whatever. And what really, to Mark's question, what really shocked me, and there's a million things, right?
Yeah.
But one thing that was really enlightening for me was most scientific researchers today we're actually putting red dye in with our cells. So we take out some fat tissue, like I'm doing at the Mayo Clinic. I'm growing stem cells right now. For example, I'm studying stem cells, epigenetics and stem cells, trying to reprogram them in positive ways, re-inject them, improve your joints, whatever. So say I took some of Mark's fat, if he's got any fat right now,
he's pretty
lean.
chubby.
And I grow that up in a plastic dish. And ding, 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 you heard the word plastic, right? So already I'm kind of behind the estrogen 8 ball because I'm growing cells in plastic. What's that going to do? Probably a lot of different things. It's going to affect the cells. It's probably going to even kill a lot of the cells that aren't adapted to estrogen. So then the cells that I'm studying, they're probably more robust. They have a strong resistance to estrogen. So then if I add other estrogen chemicals, they're already resistant kind of. Yeah. So they're okay. But that's not what's happening in your body. That's just because you've killed off a lot of the other cells. But let's pretend we're not growing them in plastic. 99.9% of scientists do grow them in plastic. But okay, we take the cells out of Mark, we put them in a dish. We're growing them. They don't just grow in dry air. You have to put liquid in there. The liquid imitates blood, right? The liquid that we use is usually called DMEM, right? And they put red dye in that stuff. And the reason they do that is because it's a pH-sensitive dye. So as the cells burn through the sugar, and by the way, it's ridiculously high sugar. It's not, these cells, another thing we're doing is we're growing them in a ton of sugar and not fats. So we're kind of disposing the cells to burn sugar in a weird way. So then when we study the sugar burning effects, it's all skewed, but that's a different topic. But the red dye, as they burn through the sugar, it turns yellow. So you can see it. So then you need to replace that liquid, because they've burned through the nutrients in there. The problem with that, it acts like estrogen. Right. So another issue, right? We're growing cells in plastic with estrogen dye, and the dye is more potent than the plastic, in my opinion. And there's some debate about how estrogenic it is, how strongly estrogenic it is, because they've done a study way back on rats. They inject them with a bunch of red dye, and then they look at the uterus and they weigh the uterus. They put it on a scale. They cut it out of they kill the rats, and then they have rats with and without red dye injected, and they found the uterus was the same, the weight was the same, and they say, oh, so it doesn't act like estrogen. That's kind of one of the arguments you can look at. The problem is if you put it in cells and it triggers the estrogen receptor, So just because it's not making the uterus heavier doesn't mean it's not acting like estrogen. So it kind of, there's some muddy water in the research on red dye, but most scientists are aware that it acts like estrogen. The molecule is very similar, and the point is, we're growing our cells in a whole bunch of estrogen. Right. Shocking to me, because I was doing that myself. So now at the Mayo Clinic, I'm literally growing my cells in red dye free media, liquid. And I'm very emphatic about that, right. And the other day I was doing a study and I ran out of some of my stuff and had to go next door and borrow somebody's. And sure enough, it's bright red, and it's like, man, I'm probably messing up my experiment, but that's the culture we live in. So we have all these studies where the cells are already adapted to living in estrogen, right? And then we do a study where we add more estrogen, like atrazine or BPA or whatever, and then the cells respond well because they're already adapted to it. They're okay with it. And then we say, oh, look at this. This is fine. The cells are doing good. It's because they're already adapted to it. You've killed off all the ones that are sensitive to it. So it's a mess. It just muddies up the water. So then you can say, well, how much can we actually trust? It makes it really frustrating when you're trying to go through the estrogen research and you have to dig into these studies and dig deep. And you have to put the glasses on, not the rose-colored kind, but you have to put the glasses on of awareness that this is what's happening in the research.
It's interesting to me that this stuff that's in different foods and different things that we use, is it really estrogen, or is it just like act like estrogen in the body? Or
it just it tricks your body into thinking it's estrogen most of the time. And different.
So it's just a chemical, basically.
Yeah,
and then it kind of in the body it will mimic or make your own estrogen levels rise.
Correct. Yep, both of those things.
And there's no goddamn chemicals out there that will make your testosterone.
Yeah.
Not that no.
Yeah, because I mean, we had a question like just, well, then how do we raise our test levels? But I think you kind of answered it
by getting rid of
estrogen.
Yeah, and there's a lot of metals. Surprisingly, if you go through, the micronutrients, a lot of guys say, oh, make sure you got lots of micronutrients if you want to increase your testosterone. But there's a lot of those that are seen as really beneficial, but they're actually lowering your testosterone. Tim Ferriss had a whole piece in his book, The 4-Hour Body, about manganese, not magnesium, but manganese, and how that's important for your testosterone, and it is. But there's a really important caveat. If you take it all the time, it actually lowers your testosterone. So if you just take it a little bit, if you're deficient and you take it, it increases your T. But if you're constantly taking it, it actually ends up lowering your T. And that's true of a lot of these, like I say, micronutrients. You don't want to overdo it with those, and because testosterone is unusual. If your body detects it as high, it starts to downregulate the receptors. There's this complicated feedback response, and that's true of estrogen also. It's a complicated system. There's crosstalk, there's SHBG, there's limo.
Right.
It's hard to pin down, and I don't have all the answers in terms of exactly how it's functioning, But what we do in the lab usually is we do what's called a luciferase assay. And I know that sounds really boring and you're falling asleep already, but it's literally firefly luciferase. So you know what a firefly is? Like at night, you see them glow green. That green color is a fluorescent protein called luciferase. It's an enzyme. And you can actually put that gene into cells, which I do this all the time, right? Most scientists do that work in molecular biology. And you put it on, where the estrogen genes normally are, you put that gene. So then you add something that acts like estrogen, and it'll actually light up the cells green. And that's how you tell if something is acting like estrogen. It lights up cells green physically. So you can see the change. So you trick the cell, right? You literally use CRISPR or something and switch out the DNA. And so, it's just a really obvious.
That's crazy. That's some comic book
dramatic
shit, though.
Yeah, dramatic. Well, you should go on your computer and look up GFP, green fluorescent protein. Type in the letters GFP and then space and then mouse, GFP mouse, right? And show this to Mark because
mouse will just be lighting up all over the place.
Yeah, you can literally change the DNA on mice. Yeah, perfect. So that's a green mouse. You see that? So that's not a great example of that one, but if you go back,
just their eyes are green.
And X out of this page, and minimize that picture that you've got it on there.
Yeah, minimize.
Yeah, there you go. Now, there you go. Left, go straight left. There you go. Click on that one. So this is an example. They took out the single cell, like the embryos, and they put in the GFP gene, the green fluorescent gene. And then as the cell divided, every cell had green fluorescent protein. And then you can see the couple mice that didn't get that.
Right.
And they've done it with pigs. They've done it with all kinds of animals.
And they're just bright green.
Yep.
Or do they light up?
No, they're just bright green. Yeah. They've even done it with night crawlers in the fishing community. You can buy green worms. And
so why haven't we done this with people?
Yeah.
Looks awesome.
Can we put that in our protein? Let's just have dudes jacked in the gym looking all green. So are they
Hulk, right? You dressed up as Hulk for Halloween, Mark?
Yeah. Are they under like a black light, or is that's
these ones probably are.
Oh, okay.
But they're green. Like even in the ambient light.
Yeah.
It's just like the night crawlers. Like, have you ever seen those worms? You open the package, they're green. I mean, you can certainly make them light up better, fluoresce, if you put them under some bright lights like this.
That's crazy.
But that's a way that we do the estrogen testing, is we use these fluorescent proteins like this. We just put them behind the estrogen gene so that instead of your body simulating estrogen, it actually just makes this fluorescent color.
Could you make that fluorescent color not bother anything? Like just, I don't know, make some fluorescent candy and sell the shit out of it?
Well, yeah. They've monetized it by putting it in fish. For kids. So they have zebrafish that are green, that glow in the dark in different ways.
Crazy.
So that you have a black light and then it'll glow really neat. But from my perspective, it's just really fascinating in the scientific realm, right? Because for example, just going back to stem cells, they've done studies with women, pregnant women, and that have heart attacks, right? And die. And they find that there's, if you had the male fetus, and you had a heart attack, at the site of the heart attack where the artery is all plugged up, you'll actually find male cells from the fetus. So what can actually happen is those stem cells can go throughout your bloodstream and actually heal injury sites. And they've done this with mice where they punched holes in the mice with needles and things, causing injuries. And then they'll have a normal mouse with green babies, green fetuses, right?
Crazy.
And then they injure them with the needle. And then they find all these green cells lighting up all the injury sites because those stem cells are going through the bloodstream. And that's one of the reasons I'm interested in stem cells now, because it's epigenetics. So it connects to all the stuff I've been doing with estrogen. But, I think stem cells are a really powerful, positive way to improve ourselves. And it's also kind of a misunderstood area, and I'm interested personally.
Yeah.
But they can figure out where those injury sites are. The stem cells can hone in and bind and fix those sites. And that's one of the ways you test for it with those green fetuses,
Right.
At least in animals.
What are some of your thoughts on stem cells? Like where are they at right now? And do you feel like they've been super effective or?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, stem cells, it's a rabbit hole by itself for sure, but
there's so many different ways to get it done and all these different things.
That's the root of it, right? Because if I took stem cells from you, you're a healthy dude, so your stem cells are going to be totally different than the average American. And if I'm studying yours versus somebody else, I'm actually going to get a totally different outcome in my study.
And maybe also too, maybe some of the usage of, we kind of haphazardly are using them. Like for me, I had an elbow and a pec injury, and I got stem cells, and I'm like, they don't work. But it doesn't really mean that they don't work. It just
Where
means
did you get the stem cells from?
Yeah, it didn't. In the scenario that I was in, and the injury that I had, and the type of stem cells that I used, whatever that procedure was, it was ineffective.
Interesting. Yeah.
But other people have had it done, and they've had different ways of getting it done. And
that's the complicated part, right? Because if you're getting stem cells from average Americans, they're probably some crappy ass stem cells. And then if you're getting them from a man versus a woman, those are different. And if you're getting them from a kid versus an 80-year-old, those are different. There's a lot of different scenarios, just where you got the stem cells and who you're putting them back into.
Right.
That it makes it really complicated.
And there's some that you can get, I guess, there's different delivery systems of it too. Like you can shoot it directly into an area.
Yep.
Or you can just get it and it's supposed to kind of take care of your whole body, I guess. I'm not sure.
Yeah. That's what they do with these mice, right? I mean, that's what the fetuses are doing in the womb. The stem cells are actually going through the uterus, through the placenta, whatever, and they're getting into the blood. So what's where I'm frustrated right now with the stem cell world is, most people won't tell you this, but the orthopedic surgeons, the doctors they pay lip service to stem cells,
right?
But they actually don't really want them to succeed because they're making more money with surgery,
right?
So it's a lot cheaper to inject stem cells and have a positive outcome than to do a big full-blown knee replacement,
right?
So there's an issue there because there's a lot of conflict of interest. And so and the FDA, of course, has gotten more behind the doctors in this regard, and they're outlawing a lot of different manipulations with stem cells. They say you can use stem cells, but it has to be minimally manipulated. That's how they're doing it right now. And what that means is you can take stem cells out and put them right back in, but you can't grow up more. So it's like, well, what's the point of that? Like you already have the stem cells. The ideal way would be if you take them out of your fat and then you grow up 1 billion of them. And then you've got and then you manipulate them with like infrared or some other way, like I'm doing in the lab, and make positive epigenetic changes, change them in a healthy way, and then put them back in a specific way. But what the field right now is going towards exosomes. So these are little fat balls that stem cells secrete, and they've got little factors in them like proteins and different signaling factors. And the reason the industry is leaning and promoting exosomes is because they're patentable. So they're very simple. There's not that much going on with exosomes. Stem cells are super complex, right? Difference between different people, different sex, different age, blah, blah, blah. I just explained. It's too complicated. You can't patent one person's stem cells and do a full clinical trial just on that person. Right? So there has to be this kind of vague difference between different stem cell clinics. Everyone is going to differ. You know what I mean? It's just so complicated that you either have to do a full, you have to do what the FDA has done and say you can't do anything with them, or you have to say you can do everything with them. Because it's going to be different in different people's hands. And then eventually it sorts itself out that this clinic is awesome and this one's not awesome. And consumers have to make that decision in my mind. But right now the FDA just kind of put their foot down just this year. And so I'm kind of irritated by that, honestly, because I was hoping to really get into the stem cell world, but now I'm kind of leaning towards not.
What's the idea of a stem cell being able to heal something anyway?
Yeah, so like, for example, with these people that have broken spines, where the neurologist, and this is not super common, but it's definitely happened enough where it's something we should pay attention to. People break their back, and a neurologist will say, "You're never going to heal," you know? They've seen a million of these cases. None of them have ever been able to walk again.
Can't do a surgery or anything for it. Nothing.
Exactly. And then they'll put stem cells in, and the guy's walking, a couple of years later. And what the and the problem is, if you broke your back and then 10 years later you did that same stem cell injection, it's not going to work because you've got too much scar tissue development, things like that. So if you catch it early enough, which is key, which is why we shouldn't be inhibiting the research, because timing is everything on this. If you catch it early enough with your elbow or whatever when you did it, before that scar tissue forms, that's an important factor, in the whole process. And stem cells are just going into your blood, and they're one of their functions, and this is happening right now in your body. Your body is shedding off stem cells, and they're cruising around your blood, and they find inflammation. They find sites of inflammation. Like, for example, TNF alpha, one of the chemicals, interleukin, another chemical, interferon, another chemical. Like, these are well-known chemicals. We're not testing for those in your blood tests. We're looking for friggin' cholesterol.
Right.
We're looking for friggin', CRP or whatever, which is an okay marker of inflammation, but that's more often related to bacteria, inflammation from bacteria or something like an infection. But the inflammation that, usually most Americans have, when we talk about, like, you have a highly inflammatory diet or whatever, it's usually because it's stimulating TNF alpha, interleukin, interferon, NF-kappa beta, these molecules that we're not even measuring in our blood tests. And that's what stem cells are looking for. They're going through your blood. They're finding those sites of inflammation, sticking in there and secreting things called exosomes that are unique to that situation. And that's why it's difficult with exosomes, because you can patent an exosome and say, look, let's do a clinical trial on just this exosome, right? Which has one protein in it or one peptide or whatever. And that's positive, right? Problem is like, in a different person, in a different situation, like the stem cells secrete different exosomes based on the context. And it's too complicated for us to figure out. So right now we're just putting them in and hoping for the best. And some people it works awesome. Some people it doesn't work.
Right.
It's not super well understood or characterized. And I'm okay with that. As long as we're not killing people and we're not causing harm. I would love to see that research continue. But right now you got to go out of the freaking country.
You mentioned something about, I think you mentioned C-reactive protein, correct?
Yeah, or hemoglobin A1C, all that stuff.
Yeah, I thought C-reactive protein, I thought that was like kind of more checking inflammation of your heart. Or is it just checking overall body inflammation, period?
Usually it indicates overall. I mean, they look at it in relation to your heart because, if you've got a lot of C-reactive protein, usually it leads to plaques in the arteries.
Right.
But I don't know a whole lot about C-reactive protein and where it originates, to be honest.
Right.
But I know that, like, if you have an infection,
right,
like,
then it could be through the roof. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've had that before. Like, I get my blood done every about 4 months or so.
Yep.
And I went one time. It was like just staggering. But 2 weeks prior, I like tore my calf or something like that. You know? So they were like, well, could be that. It could have a cold. And next time I got it tested, it was in the normal range again. It's
that's important.
Checking your blood is a really interesting thing. Sometimes it's only a snapshot of what's really going on
all the time.
What do you think are important things for people to get done when they get their blood work done? Like, if you had to, kind of go over maybe a list of a couple things, do you think people should be checking in on?
Yeah, when I was outlining this carnivore diet study, did you see that study I was setting up?
I didn't, but I'm aware of it. Yeah, you did I think you are working on a 90-day study on the carnivore diet.
Yep. Yeah, I feel like there's just no data on the carnivore diet. I mean, there's anecdotal evidence.
That's what Joe Rogan keeps flipping out about the whole time, and it's like, okay, definitely there's not a lot of research on it, but it sounds, I understand where he's coming from, but it sounds absolutely insane and ludicrous that we'd be testing something that has been part of we wouldn't be here.
Ancestry.
Yeah, we wouldn't be here if we weren't able to survive on meat. And I think that there's probably been a lot of cases of that over human history.
Like for me in my consulting, every once in a while I put somebody on the carnivore diet, and usually I have really good results too. Right. But I don't totally know the best timing for that. I can't say, oh, this you're going to do really well for the carnivore diet because you have this, and that. Because there's really no data.
Right.
And
it's great to have that extra information, so you can know where and when to apply it.
Yeah, because just last week I had a lawyer of all things, which makes me nervous, and I had put him on the carnivore diet, and he had heart palpitations and all kinds of problems. And I don't know if that's related to keto and releasing toxins from his fat cells and other things. And that's what I told him, like, this is an option. It's probably better to pull off of the carnivore diet because I don't want to, I don't want to have any more serious issues, but I don't know, you know what I mean? But yeah, usually I find really positive things, especially related to inflammation. So what I'm doing is I'm initiating a study where people are going on the carnivore diet. They're already going on it anyways around America. A lot of people are doing it. So I figured if you're doing it anyways, and a lot of people are getting their blood work done anyway, then send me that data. Like I hate to just have this one person over here in California, one person over here in Oregon, you know what I mean? Like one person in Minnesota doing it, and nobody's compiling the data and publishing it for other people to utilize. Again, it goes back to knowledge is power. With that carnivore diet study, you're asking which blood markers I'm interested in most. I outlined a whole bunch of them, and it's pretty much the standard ones.
Right.
Me personally, like you have to check for the cholesterol and all that stuff, but I'm not super enamored with that stuff. I'm more interested in, your thyroid hormones. And by the way, there's a lot of genes that are related to low thyroid that I find frequently. And, those same people often struggle with low energy when I'm doing consulting. That's a big win when I find low energy and I'm able to fix it. I mean, that's why I do consulting for everybody, not just pro athletes. It used to just be pro athletes because I'm busy. Right. But I opened it up to everybody because it's so valuable for people, and that's a big one. Thyroid hormone, CRP, I check, blood sugar. I want to see this in the carnivore diet. Hemoglobin A1C, which is kind of a longer term snapshot of blood sugar. Gosh, I don't know, just the basic. I mean, iron, I do want to see iron for the carnivore diet. I mean, everything that people want to check, myself included, just the standard stuff for the most part, because again, people are doing that anyways.
Are you doing the carnivore diet as well?
I did it for, about 20 days, and I actually got lightheaded, and I'm super busy, and I did the keto for 30 days, and I had a phenomenal experience where I was, just really productive, really felt awesome. My lifting went down a little bit, but as you can see just by looking at me, I'm not a super lifter to begin with, but just because I do monitor where I'm at with my routine.
Right.
My lifts went down, but I know that stuff goes down and then goes back up usually. But with the carnivore, I had some side effects that I didn't like in terms of productivity. It was messing up my work. So I stopped. And Sean Baker, when I was consulting with him about, this carnivore diet study that I'm setting up, and by the way, it's a crowdsourced study. I don't have money to pay anybody because I'm putting this study together myself personally. Right. So I'm not, and I'm not desperately looking for people, so I don't have to pay people. Most research studies, nobody will participate unless you throw money at them. But a lot of people are irritated by that. But I'm saying, hey, look, you don't have to participate. I'm not forcing anybody to do anything. I just want the data. It's a valuable thing. But what was I? Oh, and I was consulting Sean Baker.
Yeah.
I was going to do this as a 30-day, but he said no, it's got to be 90 because he's compiling a lot of data just from his stories that he's getting in, and there's definitely kind of a slouch period or whatever you want to call it. There's a period where you're kind of adjusting, and then you pull out of that, and then you start to see the benefits. And again, usually the benefits are related to immune overactivity and things like that.
Yeah, the main thing that I would question with something like the carnivore diet, I've utilized it myself. I'm a huge fan of it, but what I'm always looking at is just like, why? Like if you don't have to cut everything out of your life, then maybe why? Now, I will also say that like maybe having like 80-90% of your food come from
that's probably more
meat
ancestral.
sources. Probably makes sense.
That's
but
more
like,
in line with ancestry.
Yeah, just enjoying some damn blueberries and having some spinach and eating a potato here and there. Seems,
I think,
pretty harmless.
I think the reason this particular guy had heart palpitation issues too, again, maybe he had some heavy metals that he was storing and he's finally releasing that. I don't know. But he also had some other genes that, indicate that he really needs methylfolate, for example, and you're not getting that from meat. You get that from leafy greens. And there's a lot of people that experience heart palpitations with their deficient in methylfolate, and they've got that MTHFR mutation,
right?
For example.
I went on like a really hardcore keto, and I've never done this before. I've messed around with different styles of keto diets for a long time, since like the mid '90s. But more recently, my brother and I did like the War on Carb stuff, and we messed around with carnivore stuff. But I went on like a full blast like clinical ketogenic diet, and I was trying to see.
That's what I do too.
I wanted to check my, ketone levels and all that stuff. I was all in. I was just primarily eating fat.
Yeah, that's 80% by calorie. That's what
dumping
I did.
oil on everything and all this stuff. And I ended up with some heart palpitations, and I was like, "Whoa, I don't know what this is, going on." And I can't say that it was directly related to that. I can't, truly say like, "Oh yeah, it was definitely that," because it wasn't like anything extra stressful was going on in my life at the time. But
well, there's a couple things because
magnesium. I can't like nail it down to just that one thing though.
Well, you find heart palpitations real commonly with heavy metals.
Right.
So possibly you had some fat that your body was burning, which happens in the keto diet, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you're teaching your body to burn fat, which is awesome. But then oftentimes your fat cells are shrinking because they're, releasing fat. They're burning fat. They're burning through it. And they're dumping all these chemicals like I was talking about, that are storing in that fat. And then that's triggering heart palpitations. That happens. Yeah. Heavy metals or chemicals, and it's hard to pin down. The other one is magnesium. Oftentimes if you're deficient in magnesium, for some reason that's really intricately involved in heart beat, signaling. Mm-hmm. And what else is really interesting to me, and something you probably don't know, is, in your body, different tissues, like your brain prefers to burn sugar. So if you give it proteins, carbs, and fat, your brain will burn the carbs first. Doesn't mean it's the best for it. It just means that's what it'll do.
Right.
But if you give your heart, if you have cardiomyocytes, if you've got heart cells in a dish and you give them proteins, carbs, and fats, they burn fat. They prefer to burn fat, which is interesting, and it probably plays some, has some role there where you're changing your heart over.
Right.
The other thing, and the reason I bring it up as interesting, it's a little off topic, but your immune cells actually prefer to burn protein. They burn amino acids if you give them, the 3 macros. And the reason that's super interesting to me is because if you've got cancer in your immune system, you might treat that differently than if you have brain cancer, or in terms of your diet. Or if you've got some other type of cancer, you might want to look at what is that tissue that you have the cancer in, and how can you change your diet to assist getting rid of the cancer,
right,
to basically promote killing cancer on top of whatever therapy that you're using.
Yeah, we had Joel Green on our podcast a while back, and man, that guy, he's insane. He's got some really great information. But he talked about it was actually really interesting how he planned his diet. I never really heard anybody talk in this fashion, but he kind of had he had kind of specific rules that he followed all the time, but then he would kind of go all in on a specific plan that's more strict to specifically kill cancer, even though he doesn't have it. I was like, that's actually really interesting. And I thought and that's in a way, that's what you're promoting. You're saying, look, we can't cure cancer, we can't prevent it necessarily, but we can certainly work towards avoiding our risks, I guess you'd say, right?
Yeah, I'm giving a talk on that next week at the Weston A. Price Foundation. One of my talks is about estrogen, of course, because I'm the estrogen guy, unfortunately.
The estrogen man.
As unfortunate as it is.
Estrogen man.
But the other talk is about epigenetics of cancer and how, these marks on the DNA, like, for example, you might not have any genetic risk for any type of cancer, and you can look at your 23andMe or whatever, and you can find that. But then you might actually change your epigenetics through your lifestyle, through crappy diet or drugs or whatever. And you might actually develop risks that you pass on to future generations, making your offspring more prone to getting cancer, that sort of thing. And it's such a new field. I mean, there's nothing definitive. You can't say this is definitely the way it's going.
Right.
But at least I'm trying to get the word out there that there's a lot of powerful information that we need to pay attention to, because that's the future of science, I think. This epigenetics, these stem cells, these things that we're just barely scratching into right now. I mean, it's cool stuff.
Yeah, it's definitely, there's definitely a lot of great information that's come from some of this talk. We had Dr. William Davis on the podcast recently, and he was fantastic as well. Former cardiologist, but going back to what you said about magnesium a little bit, he mixes Alka-Seltzer with milk of magnesia, and found that that's a really effective way for him and a lot of the people he's worked with in the past to get magnesium. And it actually, I guess milk of magnesia is it's actually kind of a crappy form of magnesium. But by mixing it with the Alka-Seltzer, it becomes really effective. And
cool.
He said he's gotten some really good results off that. He's very specific about it being Alka-Seltzer and not just sparkling water or whatever. Which I just found all these things really interesting. It's first of all, how the hell did he even stumble upon? And how the hell did he even stumble upon that? And then he talked to us about this yogurt that he found that is really effective for gut health and all these different things. It's just
he's a cool guy. I like him.
Man, it's wild, and it's unfortunate that some people are just, for whatever reason, not born with the capacity to kind of deal with all this crap that we have in our society, and other people are, and they don't have to ever really think about it a whole lot.
Well, magnesium inherently is anti-inflammatory, and that's one thing that's super important for people today because most people have too much inflammation. But then the other thing about it is it's deficient in most people.
Right.
So it should be everywhere, but we're deficient in it, and we need it more than ever. So it's a really important thing.
Yeah, well, when I start to think about these different supplements, I have a lot of I take a lot of shit. There's stuff everywhere at my house.
Yeah, me too.
It's just I like vitamin C, and I just have everything, and I try to get everything through food too. I understand the importance of that, but I have all these things, and I'm obsessed with it. I think it's gonna make me superhuman or whatever. And when you are utilizing all these different little tricks and all these different things, you're kind of thinking that it's going to cause this thing versus causing another thing. Like I supplement with magnesium. I have all different kinds of
I do too.
all different kinds of supplements everywhere.
We're the nerds. We're the supplement nerds.
Yeah, totally get nerdy about it.
My wife hates it. Got a million of them.
Oh yeah, my wife is just let me just take over the house with my supplements. They're everywhere.
Yep.
They're everywhere all the time. Is there anything that you've noticed from a supplement perspective that's helped kind of keep some of this in check?
Oh yeah. Well, I think it's so personalized. I mean, even the infrared, right? Like people respond differently with infrared based on their nitric oxide genes and things like that. I mean, that's something I'm always trying to figure out is, how can I help somebody best in their unique situation? And that's why one diet isn't a fit-all thing, because different people respond differently to different things. And there's certain principles, you want to be burning fat. I mean, I don't care who you are, if you're a human being, but then there's other things that are really customizable. And that's something I'm always trying to achieve. And the science, again, the epigenetics, it's such a young field. As that matures, we're going to have a better and better knowledge base to figure out. But the problem is most of modern medicine isn't interested. So they're not helping in the cause. So a lot of it you have to figure out on your own, and you have to dig in, but that's what I try and do. I just try and figure out customized approach. Some people need magnesium a lot more than other people. Some people don't need methylfolate. Some people can do the folic acid thing, the B vitamins. Sometimes I find, for example, people genetically that actually can handle the vegetarian diet pretty well. And sure enough, when they do it, they feel fine. Most people, they can't, you know what I mean? Or they have to supplement really carefully. And even then, for some reason, it just doesn't work that well. Things like that, right? Like you just have to customize your approach based on your own body. Just the way it is.
I would love to not have to take any supplements, but I actually, as I started to think about these things more clearly, I'm like, well, there's a lot we're up against nowadays.
Yeah.
So yeah, I could probably be on a specific diet where I try to get in everything, but there's external forces that are fighting against you every day, such as these plastics and these heavy metals and these things. They weren't really around before. They're man-made, right? There's these chemicals that are in our foods, that are in our cups, in our contaminated in our water, and so therefore, when you think about not necessarily just supplements, but like vitamins and minerals, it kind of makes sense that you might have to go outside of what you normally would eat.
Yep.
I mean, even the stuff that you hunt is not the same stuff that you would have been able to hunt, 1,000 years ago.
I know.
It's all changing, and things have gotten to be kind of out of hand, and so you can combat some of this with some supplementation, and obviously you want to try to do everything you can with your diet. What are some kind of take-home things that people can walk away with for today if you had to give them like 3 or 4 things?
Yeah, I think filter your water, hit the sauna, watch your personal care products. I mean, the basics.
Filter your water with
activated charcoal.
Okay.
Some of the filters surprisingly don't have activated charcoal. They call it carbon sometimes. It's not really carbon because it's activated carbon. It's activated charcoal, but sometimes that's okay. If it says carbon on your filter, that's fine. That means
I'm buying a goddamn sauna, by the way, Andrew.
Nice.
Tired of you holding me back.
Put it here in the gym. Ben Pekulski's got one in his gym. I was using it.
Put it right here in the podcast room.
Let's do podcasts all sweaty. Yeah. I mean, I love awesome. I think saunas are the greatest thing.
We'd have to go a lot faster than normal.
Start getting lightheaded.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, just try and get the big wins and just trust the science. It's like vitamin D, right? Like when you take if your vitamin D is low, take it whether you feel a difference or not. Bring it up, because the science is pretty clear that if you're below a certain level, you're going to have joint issues. You're going to have all kinds of different. You have to trust the science to some degree on this, because there's not the dramatic changes. Like you're not going to get a migraine if you've got artificial estrogen, something that you feel immediately. Some of it's a slow process, and usually, as you know from working out, I mean, the slow, gradual changes that you make to improve your life are the best kind.
Yep.
But they're also the kind that require they require commitment and dedication that you don't get immediate feedback from.
Just and also that doesn't happen overnight either.
Yeah. Yep.
I'm more dedicated now than ever. So it takes a long time to like build up that resolve. I'm sure the same is with you and your profession. You're probably, maybe 5 years ago you weren't as upset, but now you keep finding these things, and you're like, for whatever reason, like more obsessed, more on fire.
Yep.
Think about it nonstop. Your wife's telling you, look, I can't handle this anymore. You mentioned the word epigenetics one more time. I'm going to put my foot in your ass. You'll like this. Our good friend, Daniel Arrego, who used to work with Quest Nutrition and has been a friend of ours, been on the podcast before. His license plate says Epigenetics. That's how nerdy he is.
Wow,
he's
aced. Mine has a deer on it. So
he's aced you in the
my
nerd
priorities
category. You gotta step up your game here.
Yeah, man.
Cool. Any other questions?
Yeah, we just had one. Have you ever heard of A2 milk?
Yeah, A1 versus A2 mutation.
Yeah,
it's a casein mutation.
Okay, no, I guess a company is actually called just A2 milk.
A2, and, that's good. Yeah,
that's good stuff there.
Well, there's a difference between people that are sensitive to lactose and people that are sensitive to casein. Most people don't know the difference, but you can determine that difference by, just tinkering around, trying something with lactose that doesn't have casein, trying casein without lactose, stuff like that. And you need to figure out if you're sensitive to lactose. But yeah, I'm a fan. I mean, you can just simply get milk from a Guernsey cow, or a different breed of cow, and they actually don't have that. The Holsteins, the ones that we use in our mass production of dairy, they've got that A2 mutation. Mm-hmm. So it's more inflammatory. You remember when people were supplementing casein back in the day?
Yeah, and not too long ago.
It's the slow release.
Right.
Mm-hmm. The reason it's a slow release protein is because when it gets into your stomach, you put mucus around it. So you get this big ball of mucus coated casein, and then it's slow release. And the reason you put mucus around it because it's so inflammatory. And your body's like, whoa, like hang on, we can't have this massive influx of inflammation. So I'm definitely leery about casein in general. Certainly I don't recommend supplementing it. Although again, that A1 versus A2 mutation is a really important topic, and I think people should.
But
should
as far as like estrogen levels, is there any different with?
No, that doesn't change the estrogen.
Gotcha.
What about, milk sometimes comes in a box rather than in a plastic container, but
BPA coated paper, and
if it's grass fed, so it's paper that still has shit on it.
Yeah, because if you put liquid in paper,
I
soak right through. So they coat it with plastic. They don't usually talk about that, but they do. Trader Joe's is actually really good. They have a BPA free policy, just as a whole organization.
I'm just gonna get milk in a paper bag.
In a glass. Old school is they used to put it in aluminum. I don't know what they're called, but big aluminum.
I understand. Yeah.
Cases, and then they would pour it into glass bottles. It's funny. My daughter, she's 8 years old, and she's reading all these books, like Laura Ingalls Wilder and things. And just the other day, she busted out a term. She said something about a scansion or a stanchion. Stanchion. And I guess that's like the platform that you milk a cow on.
Oh, yeah.
So like my daughter knows all about these old school like dairy
That's
techniques.
Great.
I don't even know the words she's using anymore, but basically the way they used to do it, awesome. The way we're doing it now is pretty iffy, but
so, taking out the delivery system, literally like what it's physically in, is almond milk okay? As far as like, okay, cool.
Yep.
Because that question came up a couple times.
Interesting.
And then our boy Bobby just asked, so I had to ask. But
I'm fine with almond. Soy.
I drink raw grass-fed milk, but it probably doesn't make any difference. Probably estrogen in there, right?
Depends. Is it in glass? I mean, if you get it from the farmers.
Yeah, it's not. The same company used to make it in glass. They don't make it in glass anymore.
It used to be illegal to sell raw dairy in America, and the Weston A. Price Foundation actually they were the front runners in making it legal. I think it's legalized in over 40 states now because of them. And you can actually find farmers that sell raw milk in glass, or you can just show up with a bunch of glass reusable jars instead of the single-use plastic crap that everybody's doing. And that's awesome because a lot of people are also sensitive to the denatured proteins that are from the pasteurization. The more you pasteurize it, like my brother, for example,
I love raw whole milk. It tastes
me too. At a
freaking
farm,
delicious.
Well, my brother, have you seen that? There's on some of the labels it'll say, I think it says UP something, like UPC or something. It means ultra pasteurized instead of just regular pasteurized, meaning you don't have to refrigerate it. They pasteurize it so much that you don't even have to put it in the fridge. You can have like a bottle of milk that just sits out for a year, like these Starbucks, like drinks with the dairy in and whatnot. The ultra pasteurized, and my brother is much more sensitive to that than he is to the pasteurized. And if he goes to a regular non-pasteurized milk, he's perfectly fine, which kind of tells you how important it is to even factor that in. There's a lot of things. But if you can find these farmers, what's really funny is that sometimes they're not allowed to legally sell you raw milk, but they can sell it for your animals. So a lot of people show up with their glass jugs and say, hey, I want some for my cat, and they're drinking it. But that's the loophole.
Right.
They're allowed to sell it, but you have to tell them that's for your animals. And you have to, usually just have to find somebody you trust.
I'll have to go to my Davis Co-op. I live in Davis, California. It's like hippie central, so they'll hook me up. They'll get me some milk in a glass, even if they have to run outside and milk a cow for me. I think they'll figure it out.
That's awesome.
I've heard that milk, like straight from a cow, is just like insanely
so
good. I've never had the opportunity to try it, but it's.
I have a friend in Florida who's got it. It's awesome. He herds the cows. They use helicopters. They have these wild cows in Florida. They're a lot smaller. They're tiny. They're like ridiculously tiny. They live out in the swamplands, and they herd them up with helicopters. And he's got a whole bunch of these. And he milks them, tames them up, and milks them and stuff. And I've drank that stuff is awesome. It's pretty crazy.
All right. Well, appreciate you coming on the show. Where can people find you? Where can they get a hold of some of these books that you've written and stuff like that? Yeah,
just the books are on Amazon and whatnot, but my website is called ajconsultingcompany.com. That's kind of where I have all my stuff. I even have a page on there. It's called ajconsultingcompany.com/what-I-use. And that just tells people the personal care products. It doesn't give an exhaustive list of everything. Yeah. It just says, hey, here's what I'm using, because I get asked that so much. I put down, here's the soap I use, here's the shampoo, whatever.
Do baby wipes have estrogen in them?
Uh-oh.
Depends on the fragrance. It depends where you get it. Probably not.
Oh, man. They're sitting in plastic
BPA-free
boxes, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, but just one outside layer has... Well, you know what's funny is I just got a reverse osmosis filter for my water supply, but I got a stainless steel one, and it has a pump on it, so it doesn't have a plastic storage tank. A lot of them have like a stainless storage tank, but they have plastic.
Sounds like you're heading into Ben Greenfield land.
Yeah.
Like Ben Greenfield just like lives in like a bubble.
Yeah.
With like a helmet to prevent all this.
With wearing blue blockers and red light on his penis.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
He's got a special light on his balls or whatever, on his gonads.
Well, I feel the thing for me, right? Like if you're gonna get reverse osmosis anyway, it's like, why not get a stainless unit that actually is cheaper? The ones that were sold by the Kinetico or the Culligan system, they wanted $1,000 for it. And this one I found on Amazon for $500, and I installed it myself. I drilled through the granite or through the quartz countertop. I actually bought like a diamond hole saw and drilled it and all this. It was pretty cool. You know, you could just look stuff up on YouTube these days and do it all yourself, and it's not that difficult. But, you know, I mean, it's cheaper and it's better for you. That's the kind of stuff I want to tell people about.
They used to have those giant jugs, weren't they? Weren't they glass at one point?
For water?
Yeah, they were
probably.
I mean, probably heavy as shit, but
yeah, no kidding. Yeah, but I mean, anyways, that's where you can find me. That's where I've got some information that's free and useful for a lot of people. Answers a lot of questions, saves me a lot of trouble.
Yeah, we'll put links to your books and stuff in the YouTube description, and then iTunes or Google Play or wherever you're listening to this. It'll be in the show notes.
There you go.
Thanks, guys.
Strength is never weakness. Weakness is never strength. Catch you guys later.